Welcome back. This is a place for quiet stories from the wizarding world. The paths Canon never walked. The choices that might have changed everything. Here, we take a single moment and turn it slightly. We follow the consequences slowly, carefully, year by year. If you enjoy these long, immersive journeys into alternate magic, consider subscribing and settling in. Now, let's start. The street is wrong tonight. Privet Drive is supposed to be quiet, smug, and beige, but the sky above it is torn open by thunder, rain slanting across neat hedges and shining cars. On the corner, where the lamppost throws a yellow circle on wet pavement, a huge black dog stands perfectly still, watching number 4. What if Harry Potter never spent a single night in the cupboard under the stairs? What if, on one wild November storm, instead of a chilly, silent morning, the most wanted man in Britain came for him? What if the story of Privet Drive began not with a letter and a cat on a wall, but with a criminal in the rain and a choice that should have been made years ago? This isn't a story about comfort. Canon Harry grows up in a house that pretends he doesn't exist, in a world where his name means everything and nothing at the same time. He sleeps in a cupboard, wears Dudley's cast-offs, learns that love is conditional and protection is something you earn by being useful. He arrives at Hogwarts brave because he has nothing to lose. But because one man refuses to accept that timeline, the night bends. The dog shudders, bones twisting, limbs lengthening. Fur becomes soaked hair, paws become shaking hands. In the lamplight, we see him clearly, Sirius Black, gaunt and hollow-eyed, Azkaban clinging to him like a second skin. He has no wand, no plan that would satisfy any sane adult, and no permission from Albus Dumbledore. He has only a name, Harry, and the memory of a promise made in a ruined house on a Halloween night. Through the front window, past lace curtains and framed photographs of a blonde boy, a playpen has been wedged awkwardly into the sitting room. Inside, a dark-haired toddler wobbles on unsteady legs, one fist clutching a stuffed elephant, the other smearing drool on the plastic edge. This Harry is not yet the boy who lived in anyone's eyes. He is just a baby who laughs at the flicker of the television and flinches at Vernon's shout. Sirius presses closer to the glass, rain dripping from his hair. Prison tattoos just visible beneath the collar of a stolen coat. What does it mean, he thinks, that the child who defeated Voldemort is penned in like an afterthought, while the Dursleys' real pride beams from every photograph? What does it mean that Dumbledore chose this? That Petunia's blood is deemed more protective than a godfather's love? Outside, the storm roars. Inside, the television mutters. The clock ticks. Harry yawns. No one knows that this is the night. Everything in Wizarding Britain quietly changes. An escaped prisoner stands on a Muggle doorstep. Dumbledore's carefully constructed wards hum in the air. Ministry laws about custody and kidnapping and the boy who lived wait, untested, in thick folders. Love, law, destiny. All three are about to collide in a very ordinary hallway. Sirius lifts his hand. One knock means breaking every rule, every plan, every protection Dumbledore believes in. It means being a criminal forever. But maybe, impossibly, a father too. His fist comes down on the door, rewriting the first fork in Harry's life. Petunia Dursley opens the door to a wanted man. In canon, of course, she opens it to a letter, to a howling baby on a doorstep, and a future of locked cupboards, burned letters, and the word freak hissed through thin lips. But what if the knock comes from Sirius Black, gaunt and shaking, already half a legend and half a nightmare, demanding the child that should have been his to protect from the beginning? This is our first fork in the timeline. Not 12 years into Azkaban, not a desperate animagus escape triggered by a photograph, but an earlier, messier jailbreak. Sirius still slips through the bars as Padfoot still uses the fact that Dementors can't quite read a dog's mind. Only this time the trigger isn't a newspaper picture of a boy he's never held. It's the raw, unbearable knowledge that Harry has been left with Lily's magic-hating sister and her purple-faced husband. He runs because staying means madness, and because Harry needs him now, not someday. Canon Harry grows up in a cupboard, measuring his worth in how little trouble he causes. He learns that magic means punishment, that questions mean Dudley's fists, that adults mean disappointment at best and cruelty at worst. Blood wards protect his body, yes, but they starve his sense of self. This Harry is pulled out of Privet Drive before that reprogramming finishes. He still hears Petunia spit out, "Your parents were drunk, your father was unemployed." But he also hears Sirius laugh, broken and furious, and say, "Your dad was unemployed because he was fighting a war." This isn't a story about wish fulfillment where Sirius is suddenly a perfect dad in a cozy cottage funded by convenient black gold. Legally, he's nothing. No trial, no exoneration, no vault access. He has black family wealth in theory and a wanted poster in practice. That means safe houses that aren't really safe, nights in shabby muggle flats, and days spent dodging both auras and Death Eaters. Harry grows up wanted and loved, yes, but also learning how to vanish when someone knocks twice the wrong way. Socioeconomic stakes thread through every decision. Sirius could reclaim Grimmauld Place, could stride into Gringotts and open half a dozen vaults, if he were willing to be arrested on sight. Instead, he teaches Harry how to live in the cracks of both worlds. Second-hand robes, not because they can't afford better, but because using the vault card would light up ministry records. A transfigured toy snitch that's also an emergency portkey. Lessons in reading and writing, mixed with lessons in false names and quiet exits. So, what does that do to a child's courage, loyalty, and sense of worth? Canon Harry is brave because he has nothing to lose. He steps in front of danger, believing deep down that his life is a fair price. Our A.U. Harry grows up hearing, "I chose you over freedom, over safety, over everything." This changes everything. It doesn't make him less willing to sacrifice. It makes him more stubborn about surviving. Because if your first experience of life is fierce, messy love instead of calculated neglect, you don't rush to die for the world. You fight to live in it. And that emotional recalibration right there at the beginning will echo through Hogwarts, through the war, through every choice Sirius and Harry make next. From cupboard boy to godson. Who is Harry without the Dursleys? So if Harry's first imprint is Sirius's fierce, reckless love, rather than the Dursleys' calculated neglect, who is he? What does the boy who lived look like when he never once has to ask, "Am I wanted here?" Canon Harry arrives at Hogwarts quiet, watchful, half convinced good things are accidents that will be taken away. Years in the cupboard train him to make himself small. He apologizes preemptively, downplays his hunger, flinches from praise because praise is usually followed by punishment. This Harry, grows up in a cramped flat or a reclaimed black property where silence is suspicious. If the house is quiet, Sirius assumes something's wrong. So we get a boy who is noisy at home, who argues about bedtime, who shouts back when he thinks something is unfair and doesn't immediately expect to be hit for it. This changes everything about his social posture. Canon Harry slips into the background at the zoo, at school, even on the Hogwarts Express, letting louder personalities set the tone. Sirius-raised Harry has been wrestling with an ex-Gryffindor prankster since he could talk. He's learned that disagreement doesn't mean withdrawal of love, it means a louder debate and then take away curry on the sofa. So when a teacher is unjust or Draco sneers about scar-headed fame, he doesn't swallow it. He challenges it because home has taught him that his voice matters. Psychologically, consistent affection from a flawed but devoted guardian changes his risk calculus. Canon Harry is brave because he's been taught his life is expendable. He walks into the forest in Deathly Hallows with a terrible, practiced ease. A Harry raised by Sirius still takes risks. How could he not, with James Potter's best friend teaching him to fly too fast and hex first? But because he has something to lose, his boundaries look different. He's more likely to send a Patronus for help, to drag an adult into the fray, to insist on backup instead of sneaking off alone. Deprivation in canon fuels Harry's humility and his almost painful empathy. He knows what it is to be hungry, to be mocked for oversized clothes, to be the unwanted boy in the corner. In this timeline, he never wears Dudley's cast-offs. He wears hand-mended robes and black heirloom jumpers that Sirius shrinks to size with shaky wandwork. He still meets house elves and muggle-borns and werewolves, but he meets them from a baseline of, "I am loved and valuable," not, "I am lucky anyone bothers with me." So does he stay kind? We think yes, but the kindness is edged with confidence. He is more entitled to fairness, less willing to endure injustice quietly. When Snape humiliates Neville, this Harry is the one who says, in front of the whole class, "That's not teaching, sir." When Fudge smears Sirius in the Prophet, he doesn't just brood. He drafts letters, demands meetings, weaponizes his fame on purpose. And heroism? This isn't a story about a boy who rushes toward death because he believes he's disposable. It's about a boy whose courage is grounded in protection. He throws himself between danger and Sirius, between danger and friends, not because he has nothing, but because he has finally been given everything that matters. Underneath it all, Sirius's own rebellious streak and hatred of bigotry become the template for Harry's moral compass. Not Privet Drive's small-minded cruelty, but Grimmauld Place's haunted history, turned inside out. Which means when Hogwarts finally enters the picture, we're not just changing who Harry is, we're changing what he's willing to burn down. And the first place that new Harry collides with canon, the Hogwarts letters, the train, and a very different introduction to the wizarding world. A new map of the saga, how this AU walks through all 7 books. So now that we've walked Harry up to the barrier at platform 9 3/4 with Sirius at his side, we need a map. If canon is one familiar railway line, this timeline is the same stations in a different order, with different people waiting on each platform. Across 7 books, we're still moving through the major crises you know. The Stone, the Chamber, Sirius and Pettigrew, the Tournament, the Ministry Battle, the Horcrux Hunt, the Final War. But because Sirius escaped Azkaban early and claimed his godson, every one of those moments bends. This isn't a story about throwing canon away. It's a story about asking, again and again, what if the same danger met a Harry who had already been loved, already been told the truth? Year 1, the Stone, is our first proof of concept. This Harry, walks into Hogwarts already knowing the name Voldemort, already knowing his parents were fighters, already knowing that the wizarding world can turn on you overnight. That means the mystery of the 3rd floor corridor doesn't hit a lonely, wide-eyed child. It hits a boy who's been warned by Sirius and a wary Dumbledore that the war is sleeping, not over. We'll track how that knowledge changes who suspects Snape, who trusts Quirrell, and how a child raised in Grimmauld Place reads a mirror that shows him family. Year 2, the Chamber, becomes a collision between Hogwarts horror and the legacy of the House of Black. Harry doesn't just hear voices in the walls. He's been raised in a home that remembers dark artifacts and pure blood rhetoric all too well. We'll ask, does a boy who grew up in a cleansed Grimmauld Place recognize the diary for what it is sooner? And what does it mean when his first instinct is to send a message to Sirius, not suffer in silence? By year 3, the canon twist, Sirius and Pettigrew, has been preloaded. Our shrieking shack isn't a shock revelation. It's a planned mission. Dumbledore is not the distant puppeteer who withholds the truth until the last act. He's an uneasy ally coordinating with a cleared, battle-hardened guardian. We'll watch how a Harry who already lives with Sirius walks into that shack with a strategy, not just righteous anger. Year 4 pulls us into the tournament, but with the Department of Mysteries already on the horizon. The Triwizard tasks still happen. The graveyard still calls, but Harry's home base is Grimmauld Place, not Privet Drive. That changes who trains him, who believes him, and how quickly the Order reforms. From there we move systematically. The Ministry battle where Sirius does not fall, the Horcrux hunt with a veteran marauder on the board, the final war fought by a boy who never had to unlearn being unwanted. So, let's explore year by year, crisis by crisis. As we go, keep a running tally in your head. At each familiar beat, how far can one rescued child bend destiny before the story itself breaks? The price of freedom. why Sirius's escape isn't a fairy tale. And here's where we slam on the brakes, because before we race off into a triumphant new timeline with cool dad Sirius and well-adjusted Harry, we have to ask, what does it actually cost to break a man out of Azkaban early and hand him a child? Sirius's escape tweak is small on paper and enormous in consequence. In canon, the trigger is a newspaper photo of the Weasleys and a rat. Here, it's silence. Years of it. No trial, no visit. No word of his godson except the Dementor's steady drip of despair and the whispers of guards who mention the boy who lived being dumped with magic-hating relatives while known Death Eaters walk free. What if, one night, that specific injustice cuts through the fog more sharply than fear ever could? He remembers he is a dog. He remembers he is a godfather. He squeezes through the bars years early. This changes everything, but not in the wish fulfillment way you might hope. When Sirius crawls out of the sea and staggers toward Privet Drive, he is not a cleared man reclaiming his ward. He is, on paper, a mass murderer and traitor. No trial, no veritaserum. Just a ministry that needed a quick name to pin on a crater in a muggle street. This isn't a story about a just system making a rare mistake. It's about a system that never wanted to look closely in the first place. Dumbledore sits uneasily in the middle of that. He knows more than he says. He knows Peter is an unregistered animagus. Knows James and Sirius were never Death Eaters, knows that a hasty Azkaban sentence protected his own political capital at a fragile moment. Does he rush to Sirius's defense now and admit the war's golden boy was abandoned to Dementors without due process? Or does he, very quietly, try to manage Sirius while keeping the blood wards and the status quo intact? Meanwhile, Sirius is free in the narrowest technical sense. As a fugitive, he can't walk into Gringotts as Lord Black without triggering half the Aurora office. He can't apply for work. He can barely buy groceries without someone recognizing his face from wanted posters. That means back alley exchanges, half-legal favors from old order members, and dangerous games with goblin bureaucracy. Forged proxies, whispered instructions to move assets under Harry's name, calculated risks that one wrong signature brings the ministry down on them both. And the opposition weaponizes every misstep. Lucius Malfoy leans on the prophet. Fudge, terrified of appearing weak, needs a monster more than he needs the truth. Headlines scream about the boy who lived being kidnapped by a deranged black heir. Even years later at Hogwarts, every time this Harry challenges the ministry's narrative, there's an easy smear ready. Of course he hates the ministry. He was raised by its most infamous criminal. Then there's the moral knot at the heart of their kitchen table. Harry technically has a fortune waiting at Gringotts. Ancient Potter gold, interest compounding while his guardian counts coins for rent and second-hand robes. Does Sirius tap that vault to keep the lights on, telling himself it's all for Harry's comfort? Does he refuse on principle and let his godson grow up watching him scrape by when there is literally a pile of galleons with Harry's name on it? He can't both protect Harry from exploitation and keep him entirely ignorant. So, does he sit an 8-year-old down and explain bloodlines, wills, and war reparations? Does he tell a child, "You are rich," while serving watered soup? Every choice here leaves a scar. Use the money, and you risk teaching Harry that love is measured in withdrawals. Refuse it, and you risk teaching him that pride matters more than security. So, let's explore what happens when those financial secrets collide with Hogwarts, with fame, and with friends who don't share his vault. Because the first time Ron Weasley walks into that marble hall beside Sirius's Harry, the quiet, grinding cost of this freedom finally explodes into the open. Love as armor, why this hard life still beats the cupboard. And yet, when that marble hall echoes and the goblins weigh Sirius's vault against Harry's scar, we have to step back and ask, does the cost make it worse than the cupboard, or does it simply make it real? Because this isn't a story about trading one prison for another. This is a story about what happens when danger arrives in a house where love got there first. Being raised by Sirius means Harry grows up with a different soundtrack. It means he falls asleep to stories of James transfiguring McGonagall's desk into a motorcycle, of Lily brewing 7th-year potions in 5th year, of the Order as flawed, frightened 20-somethings who chose to fight anyway. It means birthdays are remembered, even if they're on the run. A lopsided cake in a safe house kitchen, a toy broom wrapped in the Daily Prophet because proper paper would leave a trail. It means his accidental magic is celebrated, not punished, Sirius whooping when Harry levitates all the cutlery instead of locking him in a cupboard for it. This changes everything about what bravery looks like to him. Canon Harry learns courage as self-erasure. You throw yourself in front of the curse because no one has ever done that for you. This Harry watches Sirius risk everything again and again, walking into ministry buildings under glamour to argue for a fair trial, slipping back toward Azkaban to pull another innocent out, refusing to let Dumbledore sideline him when Harry's safety is at stake. Survival for him means holding on to each other, not sprinting ahead alone, so he doesn't grow up imagining himself as a lone legend. He grows up in a clan. Even if they're in hiding, he's a Black by blood ties and a Potter by name, taught the tangled tapestry of both. He knows which great-aunt blasted Sirius off the family tree, which Potter ancestor backed Muggle-born rights in the Wizengamot. He has god-uncles like Remus who correct the stories, who add the quiet, unheroic details about fear and grief, and a scattering of old Order members who know exactly who he is when he walks into a room. That means when war circles back, we don't get a solitary chosen one standing on a rock. We get a messy, fiercely protective constellation. A fugitive godfather who will duel anyone between Harry and the door. A werewolf who will sit up all night, crafting lesson plans that teach defense without turning Harry into a weapon. Former Order members who argue, who disagree with Dumbledore, who steal close ranks when Harry's name comes up. The danger doesn't disappear. Voldemort still wants him dead. The prophecy still hangs over his head. But because he's been raised inside this net of loyalty, love becomes a kind of armor. Not something that stops curses, but something that keeps him from confusing martyrdom with destiny. A cupboard teaches you that you survive alone or not at all. Sirius's world teaches him that surviving is a team sport, and that might be the only protection that ever really mattered in this timeline. Stepping into the story, setting our starting point. So, let's step into this other timeline, not as analysts ticking off divergences, but as eavesdroppers, standing just outside a thin, peeling door. What does it actually feel like when love becomes armor instead of an afterthought? What does it mean when surviving is a team sport and the team is only two people? A haunted young man and a baby who will not remember the night his world exploded. This isn't a story about prophecies and dark lords, not yet. It's about late autumn, 1981. The air has that metallic chill that bites your lungs when you breathe too fast. We are a few weeks past Godric's Hollow, and London or Manchester or some other muggle city that never learned to pronounce Voldemort is going about its business. Buses hiss at curbs, shop windows glow. Somewhere, the wizarding world is raging and rejoicing and grieving. Here, on the third floor of a tired brick building, Sirius Black is hiding. The flat is borrowed under a false name and a hastily forged tenancy charm. It's cramped in the way places are when no one has lived in them long enough to leave a mark. Second-hand furniture crouches against the walls, a sagging brown sofa that smells faintly of cigarettes, a wobbling table with one leg propped on a transfigured paperback, two mismatched chairs, Sirius picked because they were cheap, and secretly because one is exactly Harry's favourite shade of toy block red. In the corner, a crib that used to be a packing crate has been transfigured and then fussed over far beyond necessity. The wood is smooth, the bars rounded, the mattress layered with charm-warmed blankets that Molly Weasley would approve of, even if she'd have words about the illegal wards on the windows. The locks on the front door look ordinary, but they hum if you touch them, layered with Sirius's jittery, overprotective magic. No one is getting in here without him knowing. Not auras, not Death Eaters, not even Dumbledore, if Sirius can help it. A muggle radio murmurs on the counter, its plastic casing cracked, its dial stubborn. It talks about strikes and football scores and an early cold snap sweeping across Britain. It does not mention the fall of Voldemort, or the boy who lived, or the man the prophet has already called a traitor. That's the point. This changes everything because here, in this room, Harry is not a symbol. He is a baby chewing on the ear of a threadbare stuffed dog. Pattern interrupt. Listen. There's the soft wheeze of the radiator, the distant rumble of traffic, the faint clink of Sirius's wand against a chipped mug as he paces. And over it, a small, determined babble from the crib as Harry pulls himself up, fingers gripping the rail with the fierce concentration of someone for whom standing is still a high-stakes adventure. Sirius turns. His hair is too long, his eyes too old. His shoulders braced, as if he's still waiting for the cell door to slam. This Harry is already tracking him across the room with bright, stubborn focus. There's a smear of mashed banana on his cheek. There is no lightning scar visible under the fall of dark hair, but Sirius knows exactly where it is. "Hey, Prongslet," he says, voice rough but softening at the edges. "You giving the radiator what for?" Harry opens his mouth. It could be another babble, another nonsense sound in a day full of them. But because we are close enough now, we hear the shape of it. A puff of air, a consonant caught and wrestled into place. "Pa," Harry frowns. Tries again, the way he will try for the snitch, for Patronuses, for impossible choices. "Pad," Foo, Padfoot. It's clumsy and perfect, and it hits Sirius harder than any Dementor ever could. For a heartbeat, the borrowed flat, the false name, the hunted life all fall silent around that one word. Whatever the Ministry says, whatever Dumbledore is planning, whatever war is still coiled out there in the dark, this is his life now. A miracle and a monster hiding together in a Muggle city, building a family out of second-hand furniture, charmed locks, and a baby who has just named his world. And from here, every choice they make will bend canon out of shape. Azkaban's ghost in the nursery, Sirius as a traumatized dad. The miracle cries at 3 a.m., the monster wakes up screaming first. Sirius comes out of Azkaban with the Dementors still living under his skin. We talk about prison as if you leave it at the gate. He doesn't. Night after night, he jolts awake convinced he's back in that freezing stone cell, breath already shallow, heart already racing, until the sound that cuts through the phantom howling isn't a guard's footsteps. It's Harry, a baby's thin, outraged wail from the second-hand cot in the corner of their cramped bedroom. What do you do when your godson's cries sound too much like your own? When your hands are still shaking from dreams of cold and despair, and you're supposed to be the steady one now? This isn't a story about Sirius Black swaggering effortlessly into fatherhood. Azkaban has hollowed him out. He's lost weight he couldn't afford to lose, cheekbones sharp, eyes too wide in the dark. Sudden noises make him flinch. A slammed door, a dropped pan, the crack of apparition from the alley below. And there's a flash of anger so fast and hot, it scares him more than anyone else. But because he survived on one thought for 12 years, Harry, 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 there is also that core of iron. He will not fail James and Lily again. This changes everything about how he moves through this tiny flat, through this new life. Every time he feels the old rage spike, he bites it back, swallows it down, because there's a boy here who needs laughter more than he needs vengeance. So we get the small, ridiculous, tender scenes that never fit inside a Ministry file. Sirius, who once memorized the rules of Quidditch, now squinting at a Muggle children's book about a very confused caterpillar, stumbling over the words, doing all the voices anyway. Sirius, transfiguring bent spoons into toy broomsticks that wobble in the air, hovering just above the threadbare rug, while Harry claps chubby hands and shrieks with delight, overcompensating with jokes, with pratfalls, with exaggerated gasps of, "Merlin's beard, did you see that dive?" because silence feels too close to Azkaban. And still, the guilt. The day a neighbor slams the stairwell door and Sirius snaps quiet, a little too sharply, Harry's face crumples. It's only a raised voice, only a flash of temper, but Sirius sees his own volatility reflected in those green eyes and feels sick. What if the monster isn't Azkaban? What if it's him? Every flinch from Harry, every hesitant reach after an outburst, feeds the fear that he's becoming the very thing he hates. Another adult who teaches a child that love is conditional on good behavior. So, he makes a choice. One more impossible, stubborn Gryffindor choice in a life full of them. Late one night, Harry, finally asleep, fist curled in Sirius's threadbare t-shirt. Sirius sits on the edge of the bed and speaks into the dark. He promises a baby who can't understand a word that this timeline will be different. He will clear his name. He will drag Pettigrew into the light. He will make sure Harry never sees the inside of a cell. Not Azkaban's, not the metaphorical ones built from fear and shame. What he doesn't know, not yet, is what that vow will cost when the war comes knocking on their thin, charmed door. The secret network, Remus, Dumbledore, and the custody Cold War. The war doesn't knock politely. It seeps in through the cracks. A name in a profit headline, a whisper in a pub, a familiar scent on a cold November wind. Remus Lupin smells that wind first. What if you were the last marauder who still believed the official story? What if you had built your survival on the certainty that Sirius Black murdered your friends? And then you walked into a dingy, safe flat and saw him kneeling on the floor, coaxing a giggling toddler to stack blocks with a toy wand. This changes everything. Remus tracks Sirius the way only someone who loved him can, following half-remembered haunts, a Gringotts withdrawal in the Black family name, a rumor of a big black dog guarding a shabby muggle building. He arrives ready for a duel, for a monster. Instead, he gets a man who looks like Azkaban has chewed him up and left only two intact things: his temper and his love for Harry. This Harry doesn't flinch from the gaunt stranger at the door. He barrels into Remus's legs, sticky hands outstretched, because Sirius has filled his short life with stories of Moony, the cleverest man he knows. How do you reconcile that with the mental image of a traitor laughing over James's body? This isn't a story about easy forgiveness. Remus is torn, and we stay with that tension. He watches Sirius cook Harry eggs with shaking hands, transfigure broken toys into dragons, wake screaming from demented dreams, and still drag himself upright when Harry cries. Remus can't ignore the tenderness, or the way Sirius never once slips and calls Peter anything but the rat. While Remus wrestles with ghosts, Dumbledore is working with maps. He knows Harry isn't at Privet Drive. The blood wards he anchored to Petunia's home are dormant, which means the protection plan he built after Godric's Hollow is failing. But because he is Dumbledore, he also knows that wrenching a child away from the only parent he remembers could create a different kind of wound. So he watches, from a distance, through order contacts and ministry reports, he pieces it together. Sirius escaped using his animagus form, took Harry, vanished. The headmaster's instincts say innocent. The chief warlock's instincts say precedent and panic. If he openly backs Sirius now, he risks shattering the fragile post-war order and the legal framework that lets him quietly protect other children. Instead, Dumbledore opens a quieter front. He reaches out through Remus. Safe houses, he suggests, discreet arrangements, places where Harry can be properly warded, which in practice means separating godfather and godson, at least on parchment. Sirius hears only one thing: another authority figure trying to take Harry away. That's where Remus becomes the bridge. He is uncle, mediator, and, unwillingly, Dumbledore's eyes. He reports just enough to prove Harry is loved, fed, and hidden, not enough to give the ministry a trail. He lies by omission to everyone, including himself, because protecting this fragile little family might be the only way to atone for not seeing Peter. We end this phase in a stalemate. Dumbledore decides, for now, to watch rather than move. But the Hogwarts letters will come, and when the castle enters the equation, this custody Cold War can't stay cold. Growing up in the shadows, Harry's early childhood with magic, so while the adults circle each other in that quiet custody Cold War, Harry's actual life is unfolding in hidden corners of Britain. Not in a cupboard, not in a nursery full of toys, in borrowed rooms and backfields and wards, layered 3 deep over rickety doors. What does growing up look like when your guardian is a battle-scarred godfather, on the run, and magic isn't a secret shame, but the air you breathe? It means the first time baby Harry makes his toy snitch float, Sirius doesn't flinch. He laughs. The toy hangs there between them, wobbling, and instead of being shoved back into a box, it becomes a lesson. That's called accidental magic, Harry. It happens when your feelings get big. You're not wrong for it. You're powerful. This changes everything. Canon Harry learned to fear anything that made him different. This Harry learns early that difference is something you learn to steer. When his hair flashes bubblegum pink after a nightmare, Sirius doesn't drag him to a barber. He pulls a cracked hand mirror from his pocket, shows Harry his reflection, and says, "All right, let's see if we can make it blue." Accidents become experiments. Spilled potion on the floor? That's not a tantrum. That's a chance to practice Scourgify together. Sirius exaggerating the wand movement with a butter knife, while Harry copies with a twig. And because Sirius is serious, the curriculum is half etiquette, half war story. Bedtime isn't fairy tales. It's Marauder-era Hogwarts, with all the sharp edges sanded down. Harry learns you don't hex someone's back. You don't draw your wand at dinner. You don't say Voldemort's name in a crowded pub unless you're ready to clear it. He hears about the Order, but in the language of heroes and helpers, not martyrs. People stood up, Sirius says, because that's what family does. He edits out the screaming and the bodies on the floor, but he leaves in the choices. Pattern interrupt. Harry also learns to say please and thank you to house elves he's never met. In one cramped, safe house that used to belong to a black cousin, Sirius walks him through portraits and pure blood crests, explaining which traditions were poison and which were just old. You bow to goblins, you don't insult muggleborns, and you always tip your server at the leaky cauldron. Identity, for this child, is a tightrope. He knows his scar is famous. He's heard whispers in back rooms above wizarding pubs, seen hands tremble when they realize who he is. But because Sirius refuses to turn him into a banner, the narrative shifts. People are grateful you survived, Padfoot tells him. They're not owed your life. Our job is to live it well, not to perform it. They are not poor the way the Weasleys are poor, but they are never settled. Sometimes there's black gold paying for a month in a discreet wizarding boarding house. Sometimes there's a mattress on the floor of a safe house, with damp in the corners. Harry learns to pack in 5 minutes. He learns that ministry officials asking too many questions are a signal not a comfort. Authority is something you watch, not something you trust. By 8, he's already in the air. Not in an organized Quidditch program, but on a child-sized broom Sirius bought under a glamour in a back alley, off Diagon Alley. They find a hidden field beyond a Muggle village, layered in notice-me-nots, and Harry kicks off. The first time, he wobbles. The second time, he's carving messy circles. The third time, he's laughing so hard, the wind steals the sound away. Up there, he isn't the boy who lived. He's just a boy who flies. Sirius watches from the hedgerow, wand in his sleeve, eyes never leaving the sky. Half proud, because this is James's son, and Lily's too. Half afraid, because the higher Harry climbs, the closer they are to the moment when hiding won't be enough, and Hogwarts and war will finally catch up to them. The missing Dursleys, what Harry never learns, and what he still does. Harry doesn't land from that flight into a cupboard. He lands in a kitchen that smells like burnt toast and dog hair, into arms that are waiting for him instead of hands that shove him away. So what if we pause here and name what's missing from this timeline? No spider-infested cupboard under the stairs. No locked cat flap. No meals withheld as punishment. No Dudley's gang playing Harry hunting down the alley. He never hears the word freak hissed at him for making his teacher's wig turn blue. Never has a report card used as evidence that he's a burden they're nobly enduring. There is no constant, low-grade terror that one wrong move means the orphanage. This changes everything. Not because Sirius can protect him from every harm, but because the baseline of Harry's nervous system is different. Canon Harry flinches. This Harry glances first to see if Padfoot is laughing. Canon Harry learns to make himself small, to erase his needs before anyone can resent them. This Harry has never had to apologize for existing before breakfast. When a teacher is unfair, he's more likely to raise his hand and say, "That's not right," because somewhere in his bones he trusts that if there are consequences, he won't face them alone. It doesn't make him arrogant. Sirius is too haunted for that. They move often, from safe house to safe house, living out of trunks that never quite get unpacked. Harry learns what it means to leave in the middle of the night without asking questions, to shrink himself in other ways. No accidental magic in front of muggles, no using his real name, no telling the friendly librarian that his dad is on the run from a government that once put him in prison without a trial. And because Sirius refuses to lie, the weight of being the boy who lived arrives early. By 8, Harry knows Voldemort's name. By 9, he has heard the word prophecy, not as destiny, but as one possible story grown-ups are afraid of. This isn't a story about a carefree childhood in hiding. It's a story about a boy who is loved and hunted at the same time. Sirius is careful, though, with the part Harry didn't live. When Harry asks about the aunt he never met, Sirius doesn't spit venom. He says, quietly, that Petunia and Vernon were never meant to raise a wizarding child. That fear can curdle people who might have been decent in another life. He makes it clear that Dumbledore chose blood wards out of desperation, not because Harry was unwanted, gently rewriting the script before it can carve itself into Harry's bones. You were always meant to be loved. You were never meant to be their burden. So we circle back to the forest. Without that crucible of Dursley abuse, is he still the boy who will walk into the trees and offer his life? Or does a childhood of being chosen daily by one flawed godfather teach him to fight for his own survival even harder? And what happens to the war if the boy who lived decides that living is the point? Money, names, and old houses, the Black and Potter legacies. If Harry is learning that living is the point, then we have to ask, what does that life actually look like in this timeline? Not just the battles and prophecies, but the bank ledgers, the creaking floorboards, the names etched into old silver. Because Sirius Black doesn't step out of Azkaban into poverty, he steps out with a head full of maps, disowned or not. He grew up wandering black properties, memorizing which townhouses had side entrances, which country estates had wardstones keyed to any black by blood rather than by will. This isn't a story about a fugitive godfather scraping by. It's about a man who knows where the bodies and the backup vaults are buried and quietly redirects that inheritance toward one small boy with green eyes. So we get, very early, a heist that isn't quite a heist. Picture a rainy morning, Diagon Alley half empty, and a big black dog padding into Gringotts. A few minutes later, a gaunt, scarred wizard with glamoured features stands at a goblin desk, Harry's tiny hand locked around his. He doesn't dare claim his own name. The Ministry would be alerted in seconds. But the Potter Vault? The goblins already know the boy who lived exists. All Sirius has to do is present the right key, the right blood, and a forged guardianship letter that Dumbledore will later pretend he doesn't know how to trace. The goblins test the blood, they test the key. They look at Harry, then at Sirius's altered face, and decide, as they so often do, that gold spends the same no matter whose war it was minted for. Harry leaves with a money pouch and a quiet, legal tether to his parents' legacy. Sirius leaves as a nameless man in a crowd, heart pounding, having just changed the financial axis of Harry's entire childhood without leaving a trace in any Ministry ledger. But because we're dealing with the Blacks and the Potters, money isn't the only inheritance on the table. There are portraits that sneer the moment Harry walks into a room, silver that has seen dark marks and wedding feasts in equal measure, tapestries that insist blood is destiny. Sirius hates all of it. He hates the way Black still opens doors, the way Potter turns heads. Yet when you're hiding from a government that wants you kissed and a dark lord who wants your godson dead, old houses and old names become tools. Wards don't care about your politics, they care about your blood. This Harry grows up hearing a different script in those echoing corridors. You're heir to all this, Sirius tells him, gesturing at a drawing room full of cursed heirlooms. But you're not owned by it. Use the vault to help your friends. Use the name to shield people who don't have one. If you ever start thinking you're better than someone because of a ring, I'll hex the ring off. Privilege becomes a weapon they point outward, not a mirror Harry preens in front of. And that brings us to the ugliest jewel in the Black Crown, 12 Grimmauld Place. In canon, it's a haunted safe house. Here, Sirius makes a colder, earlier choice. He will reclaim it. Not because he forgives it, but because he needs a fortress. That means facing Wahlberger's screaming portrait, dismantling curses his ancestors layered for centuries, walking back into the childhood hallway where he once ran away at 16 and never looked back. It means turning the darkest Black House into the beating heart of their resistance, years before the Order officially reforms. So when war finally comes knocking, Harry won't just have a godfather and a vault. He'll have a name, a network of old magic, and a house that was built to keep monsters out, and, uncomfortably, to keep a certain kind of monster in. The question is, what happens when you try to cleanse a house whose very foundations were poured in blood supremacy? A different kind of letter. When Hogwarts finally calls, we stay in that house built on blood and secrets, but we jump forward. The walls are cleaner now. The screams in the wallpaper are quieter. And on a grey August morning, a tawny owl taps at the grimy kitchen window of number 12, Grimmauld Place, while an 11-year-old boy looks up from his porridge and knows instantly what this means. No cupboard under the stairs. No mysterious green ink on an envelope from a world he's never heard of. This Harry has spent years perched on the edge of that scarred kitchen table, chin in his hands, listening to Sirius talk about floating candles and bewitched ceilings and food that appears when you only have to think you're hungry. He's heard about the sorting hat and the way James pretended to faint when it yelled Gryffindor too quickly. He's memorized every story about the Marauders turning exams into performance art. So when Sirius unlatches the window and the owl swoops in, there is no bewilderment. There is recognition. There is a boy who has been counting down to this morning since he learned to count. Canon Harry's letter is a revelation because it proves magic is real and escape is possible. Here, the letter is confirmation, proof that the future he's been training for in stolen practice sessions with a school trunk of old textbooks is actually arriving. This changes everything in a quieter, deeper way. Not discovery, but validation. Grimmauld Place itself reflects that difference. It's still gloomy, still too full of mounted house elf heads and portraits that hiss about blood traitors. But there are scorch marks where Sirius has blasted off certain heirlooms. There's a Quidditch poster over the fireplace. The table is cluttered with spell diagrams and half-finished defense drills. This isn't a story about a boy dragged into a hidden world. It's about a boy raised at the threshold, finally being invited to step through the main gates. Sirius breaks the seal with hands that are almost steady. Almost. Pride hits him first, sharp and bright. He managed it, against Azkaban, against the Ministry, against a timeline that was never meant to bend this way. He's kept James and Lily's son alive and loved long enough to get a Hogwarts letter. Then fear. Because Hogwarts isn't neutral ground in this what if. It's Dumbledore's territory, and Sirius knows it. What does it mean to send Harry into the headmaster's domain when you've already defied his plan once? When the Blood Wards were sacrificed for a different kind of protection, guardianship, black family magic, and a godfather who refuses to disappear. Harry leans in as they read together, shoulders bumping. They joke, because that's how this family survives sharp edges. Harry vows he's not going to Slytherin. Sirius snorts that he'll disown him if he ends up in Hufflepuff, then immediately backtracks with a grin and a mutter about underestimating Hufflepuffs being how Death Eaters lose jewels. But under the banter, there's strategy. They talk about Gryffindor as home turf, about how being sorted with potential allies matters when you're the boy who lived, and half the school has an opinion about you before you arrive. They talk briefly about what happens if the hat whispers Slytherin, and whether Harry can ask it for something different. Not because Sirius hates snakes, but because he knows which house Dumbledore will watch most closely. Pattern interrupt. In canon, this is where Hagrid bursts in and sweeps Harry away from Privet Drive. Here, nobody bursts in. Nobody rescues. Sirius is already here. He folds the letter very carefully and meets Harry's eyes. "We're going to do this on our terms, Harry," he says, voice low. "Not Dumbledore's, not the Ministry's. Ours." And with that, the stage is set. Hogwarts as both dream and battlefield, and an 11-year-old walking toward it with his godfather's hand on his shoulder. And a plan. Dumbledore's dilemma. Blood wards versus a living godfather. They don't meet at Hogwarts. They don't meet at Grimmauld Place. They meet in the low amber light of the leaky cauldron, where the air smells of smoke and stew and old secrets. Because what do you do when the man who has been shaping the war from the shadows has to sit across from the man who has been raising the boy at its center? What happens when theory meets 11 years of lived life? Tom gives them a back room, 1 table, 3 chairs, a pot of tea that goes mostly untouched. Dumbledore arrives in sober navy, not flamboyant plum. As if dressing down can soften the power imbalance, Sirius is already there. Back to the wall, hair tied back, wand visible. Harry sits between them, not quite in the middle, but close enough to make a point. This isn't a story about a kindly headmaster and a reckless godfather squabbling over bedtime. This is a custody hearing wrapped in prophecy, politics, and blood magic. Dumbledore starts with what he thinks is unassailable: the blood wards. He explains calmly that when Lily died, her sacrifice bound protection to her blood. That by placing Harry with Petunia, he anchored ancient magic to Privet Drive itself. As long as Harry could call that house home, Voldemort could not touch him there. In canon, we're told this as exposition. Here, we watch Sirius's face as each word lands. Then comes the reveal. Harry has not lived there in years. The wards, Dumbledore admits, have been dormant at best. He speaks of contingencies, of watching wards from afar, of weighing risks in a world that thought Voldemort gone. Sirius's chair scrapes. His voice is low, dangerous. You left him unprotected. You left him with them for nothing. And in that moment, we see what it means that this Harry did not grow up in a cupboard, but still had those first years written into his bones. Sirius counters with his own litany. Fidelius charms layered over safe houses. Old black properties warded to within an inch of paranoia. Oaths sworn with Remus, with Andromeda, with anyone he trusts to protect Harry if Azkaban ever drags him back. He argues that love and vigilance are protections too, that a godfather who sleeps on the sofa outside his godson's room is a ward no rune can match. Harry listens, really listens. He's not a child being spoken over. He's the case file on the table. He asks why he was never told about the blood magic, why no one explained that his safety had once been tied to an aunt who called his mother that dreadful girl. He asks Dumbledore, very quietly, what else he's not saying. This changes everything. Not because Dumbledore suddenly becomes a villain, but because his grand design has met an 11-year-old who has learned from Sirius to question every adult who talks about the greater good. The compromise, when it comes, feels less like agreement and more like a ceasefire. Harry will attend Hogwarts under Dumbledore's watch. The school is still the safest place, the best place for his growing up. But Sirius will not be cut out. He will have unrestricted contact, his own channels of information, his own promises from Harry. Means when secrets start to coil through the castle, Harry won't be navigating them alone. Means when Dumbledore withholds, Sirius will press. So, let's explore what happens when Hogwarts opens its doors to a boy who lived with two competing generals at his back, and a first year who's beginning to realize he might have to choose which war he's really fighting. Diagon Alley with Dad, entering the wizarding world in public. So, when Hogwarts opens, it doesn't open onto a cupboard boy blinking in the sun. It opens onto a boy who's walked Nocturne Alley in a dog's shadow and flown a real racing broom before he could spell Nimbus. But what happens the first time that boy steps into Diagon Alley, not as a secret, not under glamour, but as Harry Potter with Sirius Black at his side? This isn't a story about a shy, bewildered child being dragged from shop to shop by a half-giant stranger. This Harry has already learned to stir potions in Grimmauld kitchen and to dodge jinxes disguised as games in the drawing room. He knows magic is real, knows his parents' names, knows the shape of the war. What he doesn't know is what it means when the wider wizarding world finally gets a good look at him. At first, it's almost normal. The leaky cauldron's bricks fold back. The alley unfurls in sunlight and steam from cauldrons. Sirius's hand rests easy but firm on Harry's shoulder, guiding him through the crush. And then, someone near Flourish and Blots drops a parcel. The scar catches the light. A whisper goes up, thin at first, then thickening. Boy who lived. Potter. Is that Sirius Black? Because in this timeline, Sirius isn't a fugitive rumor. He's the recently cleared ex-Azkaban inmate whose trial dominated the Prophet for weeks. Half the alley remembers him as James Potter's laughing shadow. The other half remembers the front page screaming, "Mass murderer." Now both images collide as he steers Harry around a knot of gawkers, jaw tight, eyes cold. Questions start flying before the quills do. Is it true you know who's really gone? Are you raising him alone? Does he remember that night the Daily Prophet's junior correspondent actually sprints from the offices, ink on her fingers, photographer in tow? Sirius steps forward, widening the space between Harry and the crowd with his own body. "No comment today," he says, voice polite, wand hand very visible. "You can owl our solicitor. This changes everything. Canon Harry learns fame as a shock. This Harry learns it as a lesson. Sirius leans down as they walk. "You don't owe them answers," he murmurs. "You choose what parts of your story you give away. It's protective, yes, but it's also curriculum. How to exist as a symbol without being eaten by it." At Gringotts, that lesson shifts from headlines to vault doors. Harry presses his palm to cool stone and watches torches flare as the cart rattles down. The Potter Vault opens on mountains of gold and relics of a life he never lived. In canon, this scene is pure wonder. Here, it's also dissonance. Harry knows what Azkaban did to Sirius, knows the Black family's old money sits gathering dust elsewhere. He looks from the coins to his godfather's gaunt wrists and asks, quietly, "Is this all mine?" "Yes," Sirius says. "Steady." "Which means you'll never be trapped by anyone's charity. Not even mine. But we use it on your terms. All right. Financial independence, framed not as indulgence, but as armor. At Ollivander's, that armor is subtler. The shop smells of dust and wand polish. Boxes tower precariously. Ollivander appears, pale eyes gleaming. "Ah, Mr. Potter, I wondered when I'd see you." A beat. And Mr. Black, 11 inches, willow if memory serves. Excellent for charm work and mischief. The recognition lands heavy. This boy is not just his mother's wand twin. He's his father's heir and his godfather's student. And Ollivander sees all of it. The phoenix feather chooses Harry again, of course. The same brother to Voldemort's wand. The same strange recoil in the air. But because Sirius is there, a hand on Harry's shoulder, the explanation lands differently. Harry hears not just destiny, but danger, and a quiet promise that he won't face that connection alone. Outside, the alley's rhythm resumes, but under it runs a new current. Pureblood matrons assess Sirius's defiance. Shopkeepers calculate what it means to have the Potter's gold back in circulation under Black guardianship. And near Madame Malkin's, a pale man in impeccable robes pauses, cane tapping once on the cobbles. Lucius Malfoy's gaze slides from the lightning scar to Sirius's protective stance, to the way Harry leans in to listen rather than flinch back. Curiosity, calculation, the faintest curl of disdain. This is not the malleable, isolated child he expected. This is a boy anchored to a disgraced but dangerous Black. In that single, measuring glance, a new political equation forms. What if the boy who lived grows up loyal to the wrong Black? What if gold, name, and narrative slip from Malfoy influence entirely? Lucius inclines his head, a cool acknowledgement, and files the image away. Means when the Board of Governors debates curriculum, when ministry committees whisper about security, when old families decide where to place their bets, they'll remember this day. Potter and Black, side by side in the sun. So let's explore how that first public emergence turns Diagon Alley from a marketplace into a battlefield of perception, and how a child learns that every errand with the wrong audience is already a campaign. Platform 9 3/4, letting go. But not completely. Diagon Alley was about performance. Platform 9 3/4 is about letting go, or at least pretending to. Sirius is there early, of course. Too early. The kind of early where you run out of real tasks and start inventing them. Because what else do you do when you're about to hand your entire heart over to a moving castle you can't patrol? He's fussing over Harry's trunk in a way that would make Molly Weasley proud, repacking the books, checking the ink bottles twice, casting one more waterproofing charm on the photo album. This isn't a story about a boy stepping into the unknown. This Harry has grown up on Hogwarts, the way some children grow up on fairy tales. He can list the 4 house founders in order and argue with alarming conviction about whether McGonagall or Flitwick is the better duelist. He's heard about the moving staircases, the squid in the lake, the way the castle feels different during exams. He is not afraid of the school. He is afraid of missing it. Sirius, though? Sirius is afraid of something else entirely, because Hogwarts means walls he doesn't control, adults he doesn't fully trust, and a headmaster who still believes prophecies get a vote. So he masks that terror the way he always has, with jokes and tactics masquerading as casual advice. Snape will try to get under your skin, he mutters, tightening a strap that doesn't need tightening. Don't rise to it unless you can win. Slytherins aren't the enemy, but they're not your friends on default either. And if the twins offer you a prototype, say yes, but don't test it on a teacher who can assign detentions for a decade. Notice the order there. Not don't prank, just prank smart. This changes everything about how Harry thinks of Hogwarts discipline. It's not a system to fear, it's a battlefield to navigate. And then we hit the pattern interrupt, because when they reach the barrier, they hear a familiar name before we ever meet a familiar face. Percy, keep an eye on Ginny. Arthur, the trolley, honestly, the twins. Molly Weasley barrels into view, arms full of jumpers and worry, and Harry's head snaps up. He knows that name. Molly, who Dumbledore trusted with missions. Arthur, who smuggled Muggle-borns out during raids. The Weasleys have been part of his bedtime stories, not as comic relief, but as quiet heroes. Mrs. Weasley? Harry blurts, before Sirius can speak. You were in the order with my dad. That one sentence shortcuts a whole book's worth of awkwardness. Instead of strangers on a platform, we have instant, almost disorienting warmth. Molly's expression softens in a way we recognize from canon. But here, it's threaded with recognition. She knows Sirius. She knows what it means that he's standing in public, head high, with James Potter's son. Their eyes meet over Harry's head. Old comrades in a war that never really ended. There's history in that look. Missions gone wrong, friends who didn't come back, arguments about Dumbledore's plans. There's also a tacit agreement. We protect him. All of us. Right, Sirius says, crouching to Harry's eye level as the whistle blows. Every week, tell me everything. New spells, strange dreams, anyone who pays you too much attention. You'll get sick of my letters, Harry grins. He means it as a joke. But because this Harry has never been punished for wanting connection, he also means it literally. Of course, you write home. That's what family does. Sirius presses something into his hand. Not just the usual owl and parchment, but a small, charmed mirror. twin to the one in his own pocket. A private channel, a refusal to be shut out. "If you need me," Sirius says quietly, "say my name. Hogwarts doesn't get to have you without me. Not again. Not in this timeline." When the train finally pulls away, Harry leaning out the window between a freckled boy and a bushy-haired girl he's just met, Sirius doesn't wave. He watches. One hand clenched around the mirror, knuckles white. He makes himself a promise Azkaban never let him make. Distance will not mean abandonment this time. And as the scarlet engine vanishes into steam and noise, we're left asking, what happens when Hogwarts meets a Harry who already knows he is loved, and a guardian who refuses to let the castle or its headmaster raise the boy alone? A different boy on the train. Meeting Ron and Hermione again, we cut from Sirius's white-knuckled grip on the mirror to the scarlet train rattling north. And the first thing we notice is this: Harry is not lost. He's pressed against the window with the easy excitement of a boy who's flown a real broom in a real orchard, who's had platform etiquette drilled into him by a paranoid godfather and a Remus who made color-coded lists. This changes everything. Because when the trolley witch slides open the compartment door and asks, "Anything off the trolley, dears?" Harry doesn't flinch, doesn't glance around to see what's normal. He's already fishing out the galleons Sirius insisted he carry, muttering, "Padfoot will kill me if I don't try the chocolate frogs." We still get the chocolate frog moment, but it's tilted. He tears open the wrapper, the frog launches, and Harry, who has practiced summoning charms he technically shouldn't know, snatches it out of the air with a delighted, "Got you." Then he flips over the card. Oh, Professor Dumbledore, he was at the trial. Moony says he cheats at chess. A beat. And Professor McGonagall, she used to visit when I was little. Brought me a toy snitch once. Ron, across from him, is staring. In canon, Ron is the guide, the expert by default. Here, he's meeting a Harry who already knows what a chocolate frog card is, who says, "My godfather," as if that phrase is ordinary and safe. This Harry is still humble, still quick to say, "I don't really remember the war." But because he's grown up with stories told honestly, he's also curious. When Ron mentions Quidditch, Harry doesn't just listen in awe, he grins and answers, "Uncle Moony let me fly his old comet. Said my mum was worse about rules than he is." We can feel Ron recalibrating. Who is this boy who laughs about minor mischief with a man the prophet still side-eyes? Who treats famous names as people he's actually met? Ron's envy is softer here, edged more with fascination than resentment, because Harry keeps turning questions back on him. "You've got 5 older brothers at Hogwarts? What's that like?" Harry has been raised to see family as wealth. And then Hermione appears at the door, breathless, bossy, absolutely herself. In the original timeline, Harry is wary, overwhelmed by her certainty. Here he recognizes the cadence of an adult who loves information. She sounds a bit like Remus on a tangent. So when she rattles off spells she's tried and books she's read, Harry doesn't shrink. He brightens. "Wait, you've actually done the levitation charm. What did you use as a focus?" Moony said it's all in the intent. Hermione blinks, thrown off balance, not by rudeness, but by genuine engagement. Ron grumbles, as always, but when he teases her about memorizing the textbook, Harry doesn't let it slide. "She's done more magic than we have," he points out, mild but firm. That's brilliant. This isn't a story about a boy so desperate for friendship, he'll accept any dynamic. Growing up with Sirius and Remus means he's seen adults apologize, watched them defend waitresses and house elves with the same sharpness. So he pushes back when Ron's jokes sting. He doesn't laugh along when other kids mentioned mental relatives. He's quicker to say, "That's not fair," because he's heard Sirius say it in much more dangerous rooms. By the time the train begins to slow and the lake comes into view, Ron and Hermione are both aware that the legend in their compartment is not the one the chocolate frog promised. He's more prepared, talking casually about wards and ministry hearings, and more complicated, haunted by things he understands too well and not at all. And as the boats wait on the black water, each of them is already making the same quiet decision: stay close to Harry Potter. The question is, when the sorting hat dips over his eyes, will Hogwarts let them? Sorting a loved Harry, house, choices, and identity. The hat comes down, and this time it doesn't meet a boy thinking, "Anywhere but Slytherin." It meets a boy who spent years on Sirius Black's knee, hearing about all 4 houses in the same breath as Quidditch teams and prank blueprints. A boy who knows that Gryffindor produced heroes and idiots, that Ravenclaw bred brilliance and cruelty, that Hufflepuff housed the ones who stayed when everyone else ran. And Slytherin, Sirius said, produced both Voldemort and the cousin who saved his life. This changes everything. Canon Harry arrived at this moment starved for belonging, repeating Hagrid's throwaway comments as gospel because they were all he had. This Harry has been told over and over that the hat listens, that house is a tool, not a sentence, that family doesn't end at the common room door. So when the brim shadows his eyes and that dry voice curls into his mind, Harry isn't begging, he's negotiating. Ah, the hat thinks, more prepared than most. It feels the confidence of a child who's been taught his life has value, the bone-deep loyalty to Sirius, and the little found family built in exile. The courage that runs toward danger, and the cunning that prefers to dismantle it from the shadows. It tastes marauder in him, the instinct to map a castle, to test its edges, to laugh at its rules while still protecting the people inside. Plenty of courage, but ambition too. It murmurs. And for the first time in any timeline, Slytherin is not an insult in Harry's head. What if, he wonders, he went there on purpose? What if sitting among the children of Death Eaters meant understanding his enemies before they grew into masks and marked arms? What if changing the story of Slytherin House from the inside was its own kind of war work? The temptation is real, not because he wants power for himself, but because he's been raised by a man who watched a war be lost through arrogance and ignorance, and who told him in low, tired tones that you win next time by knowing the board better. Slytherin would make him a better strategist. Gryffindor would make him a better banner. So where does he belong in this AU? Is he still the boy who dives after the troll, or the boy who makes sure the troll never gets into the castle? The truth is uncomfortable. He is both. This isn't a story about erasing his recklessness. It's about giving it context and choice. And the hat, ancient and shrewd, weighs not only traits, but trajectory. A Harry raised by Sirius has already been taught to question Dumbledore, to doubt narratives, to protect his own. Placing him in Slytherin risks turning him into a knife the adults will all try to claim. Placing him in Gryffindor lets him anchor to friends who aren't playing the same political game. "Better be Gryffindor," it shouts. But the decision is closer than in canon, edged with what-ifs. As the roar rises, Harry slips off the stool and, almost against his will, glances toward the staff table. Dumbledore is watching him, eyes bright and measuring. In that single look, Harry feels it. He is not just a first year with ink on his fingers and dog hair on his robes. He is a piece on someone's board, and the game has already begun. First year, new rules, the stone plot with a prepared protagonist. Harry walks out of the Great Hall not just dazed and hungry, but already cataloguing threats. Who watched him too closely? Who flinched at his name? When you grow up with Sirius Black pacing the kitchen at midnight, muttering about Death Eaters and trials, you don't assume adults are harmless. So when Quirrell's turban twitches at the sorting, when the man stammers at the word Voldemort but goes rigid at the word war, this Harry files it away because he knows what a veteran looks like. He's seen Sirius wake from nightmares with his wand in his hand, a defense professor who smells of garlic and fear. That's not just a nervous academic. That's a problem. Then the troll comes. Canon gives us 3 bewildered children and a miracle. Here, the moment the announcement echoes through the Great Hall, Harry's mind snaps to pattern. An unsecured creature in a fortress Dumbledore swore was safe, a panicked staff table. And that forbidden third-floor corridor Dumbledore warned them away from in the same tone Sirius uses for never touch that curse. Coincidence or cover? Pattern interrupt. Harry does not run off alone. Instead, we see him in the common room that night, ink smudged on his fingers, Ron snoring on one side, and Hermione restacking his parchment on the other. He writes to Sirius the way other kids write in diaries. Fast, unfiltered, brutally specific. Quirrell fainted at my name. Snape glared at me all through potions. There's something dangerous on the 3rd floor and a troll just happened to get in. Does this feel like a distraction to you? This isn't a story about a boy detective playing hero for fun. This is a boy who's been told, in low, serious tones over chipped mugs of tea, exactly what Voldemort tried to do to his family. Sirius's reply arrives thick with underlining. Do not investigate alone. Gather information. Use your friends. Ask McGonagall what a philosopher's stone is. She'll dodge, so go to the library. And because Harry trusts him, the trio's choices tilt. Fewer midnight wanderings just for the thrill, more afternoons buried in restricted section references to alchemy and Nicholas Flamel. More, Professor, what does it mean to make gold and an elixir of life? Asked with feigned innocence. They begin to understand that the stone isn't just shiny treasure. It's a way to anchor a failing body to the world, to cheat the natural end. What if, Before he ever touches the mirror of Erised, Harry has already had Sirius explain why some wizards fear death so much they tear their souls. What if he walks into this mystery knowing immortality is Voldemort's oldest obsession? So when the pieces finally click, the Gringotts break in, the third floor protections, Quirrell's absences, Harry doesn't think, I have to be the hero. He thinks someone is coming for the stone, and I know exactly who waits behind their eyes. He still goes down the trapdoor. He still ends up facing Quirrell, air hot with dark magic. But the stakes inside him are different. He isn't a child vaguely avenging faceless parents. He is James and Lily's son, raised on their stories, standing between the man who murdered them and the immortality he's chased all Harry's life. And he understands, with terrible clarity, what it means to say no. Consequences and conversations after the stone. He survives. The stone is destroyed. On the surface, the timeline snaps back into place. But because Sirius Black is not a rumor in a photograph or a name in Hagrid's slip of the tongue, the aftermath in the hospital wing is a different battlefield entirely. We open on the familiar tableau, white sheets, sun through high windows, the smell of potions and chocolate frogs. Harry wakes to Ron's snoring and Hermione's anxious hovering. And then a new sound, a chair scraping hard against stone. A man's voice, raw, disbelieving, furious. What do you mean he went down there alone? What do you mean you knew something was wrong with Quirrell? This Harry has heard Sirius angry before, at the Daily Prophet, at Fudge, at the memory of Peter, but he has never heard him angry at Dumbledore. Madame Pomfrey allows Sirius in under strict supervision, wand confiscated, 2 auras at the door. It's political theatre as much as medical policy. The Ministry wants to be seen monitoring the boy who lived's controversial guardian. Sirius doesn't care. He sits at Harry's bedside, hands shaking, voice low as he asks what happened, then rising as Harry admits, haltingly, that yes, Dumbledore left clues. Yes, they thought someone was after the stone. Yes, they went. And Dumbledore arrives in time to hear it. Canon gives us a quiet, almost whimsical bedside debrief. The wise old headmaster explaining the power of love. Here, the conversation is a 3-way standoff. Dumbledore speaks of tests of character, of trust in Harry's choices, of the protections that meant Voldemort could not truly touch him. Sirius cuts across him, every inch the protective parent. Tests? He's 11. You used my godson as bait. This isn't a story about a noble child soldier nodding along to the greater good. Harry loves Dumbledore. Harry loves Sirius. He also remembers the pain in his scar, the cold in Quirrell's grip, the way Sirius is now gripping the bed rail like it's the only thing keeping him from drawing a wand he doesn't have. Harry asks the question Canon Harry never quite dares. Did you know I would go after him? And when Dumbledore answers, carefully, that he trusted Harry's heart, we watch that trust reframed. Admiration, yes, but also calculation. This changes everything, because Sirius is there to say the quiet part out loud, to point out that if Harry had died, every adult in that room would have had a hand in it, to insist in front of auras and media witch and headmaster That guardianship means consultation, not post-mortem explanations. Outside the ward, the media storm breaks early. Rumors leak. Hogwarts students write home. Portraits gossip. Ministry clerks talk. The prophet runs with it. Boy who lived faces you-know-who again. Questions over school safety. Is Sirius Black fit to protect Harry Potter? Some paint Sirius as reckless, an ex-Azkaban radical raising a weapon, not a child. Others frame him as the only adult who actually tried to keep Harry out of the line of fire. Dumbledore, who in canon can rely on Harry's isolated loyalty, now has to navigate a godfather with legal standing, public sympathy, and no intention of being sidelined. Secrets become harder, half-truths more dangerous. The scene ends small, not grand. Visiting hours over, Aura's impatient, Dumbledore gone. Sirius leans close and says quietly, "Next time, we plan together." It sounds simple. It's a promise and a threat to the entire war strategy as we know it. Because what happens when the Chosen One and his guardian start planning together instead of alone? Second year, same school, new secrets. The chamber opens, and when we jump forward into second year, we see exactly what that promise means. The barrier at platform 9 3/4 slams shut. Canon gives us panic, isolation, a flying car born of 12-year-old impulse. But because this Harry has a godfather who plans with him, the crisis lands differently. Ron still rattles the trolley. Ginny still clutches her second-hand cauldron, but Harry doesn't feel abandoned in a Muggle station. He feels the tug of two families at once. Molly Weasley's already written Sirius twice that week to say, "Yes, of course Harry can stay with us over Christmas. Don't be ridiculous." And Arthur has spent half of August in Sirius's kitchen arguing about ministry policy and Muggle plugs. This isn't a story about a lonely boy latching on to the first warm household he sees. By now, the Weasleys are not a temporary refuge. They're the Hogwarts extension of a life Sirius has been carefully building. Harry has a bed at the Burrow that's his, a knitted jumper with his initial, and a place at the table where Molly absent-mindedly refills his plate before Ron's. So when the whispers about the heir of Slytherin begin, when the first message appears in blood, this Harry doesn't automatically assume it's his problem to solve alone. He's been raised with order conversations over dinner, with Sirius and Remus dissecting old missions in half-coded language. He knows the word Horcrux as a thing adults go quiet around. He knows Tom Riddle is not just a name on an award. And crucially, he's been warned about snakes. Sirius, who grew up in a house obsessed with bloodlines, remembers stories from the First War. Voldemort speaking to serpents. Rumors of a monster under the school. A diary recovered and quietly locked away after a girl died in the 50s. In this timeline, he's had 12 years to obsess over every connection. So the summer before second year, when Harry offhandedly mentions he once made a zoo boa constrictor very happy, Sirius goes still. He explains Parseltongue not as a cool trick, but as a dangerous sign people will misunderstand. So when Harry hears the voice in the walls, it's terrifying, but not inexplicable. He doesn't gaslight himself. He doesn't decide no one will believe him. He goes to McGonagall the next morning, voice shaking, and says, "Professor, I think I heard a snake. If Remus is teaching, he goes to him as well, because Sirius has drilled into him that secrecy is what got his parents killed." This changes everything about the adult's response. McGonagall doesn't dismiss it as childish nerves. She flews Sirius and Dumbledore that night. Remus walks the corridors with detection charms Molly pressed on him for the children. Arthur quietly asks around the ministry about any cursed objects gone missing from old evidence lockers, a question that makes Lucius Malfoy's palms sweat. When Harry speaks Parseltongue in the dueling club, the reaction is still sharp, still fearful, but he is not blindsided by the stigma. He hears the gasps and remembers Sirius's warning. "They will think you're one of them." He also remembers Molly's hands on his shoulders at King's Cross, saying, "We know who you are, love." Public suspicion hurts, but it doesn't hollow him out. From afar, Sirius puts it together faster. Parseltongue attacks, a whisper of a diary passed to a shy red-haired girl in flourish and blots. He doesn't know yet that it's Ginny, but we do. And the basilisk is still in the pipes while the adults scramble closer to the truth. One step ahead of canon, and still, heartbreakingly, one step behind the danger. Because what if being believed isn't enough when the monster is already awake beneath their feet? Into the chamber with backup, rescuing Ginny Weasley. The moment the diary hits Sirius's hands, the timeline shudders. He doesn't touch it, bare-skinned. He's lived too long with dark objects in Grimmauld Place not to recognize the way they seem to drink the light. A gloved finger, a testing prod, and then a letter written in his tight, impatient scrawl that reaches Harry at the Burrow 3 days earlier than Canon McGonagall's panic. "Burn this. Tell Dumbledore. This isn't a schoolboy's diary. This is what we used to call a soul anchor. This changes everything." Not because Sirius instantly knows the word Horcrux, but because he knows what it means when a fragment of will clings to an object and whispers. He's seen Regulus die chasing one. He's heard Death Eaters boast about the Dark Lord never truly falling. And he has no intention of watching another child in his family be hollowed out by someone else's magic. So, instead of Harry and Ron piecing clues together alone in a hospital wing, we get strategy. We get Molly's shaking hands on the letter, Arthur's face going grey, McGonagall pale and furious as she reads Sirius's warning in Dumbledore's office. We get Remus, summoned under pretense of consulting on advanced curses, arriving through the flue and going still when he sees the diary in a glass box. This Harry doesn't go down there alone, Remus says quietly. James would haunt the lot of us. Canon gives us a 12-year-old boy disappearing into the pipes with a broken wand and a phoenix he didn't ask for. This isn't that story. This isn't a story about a neglected child assuming no one will come if he calls. This Harry argues. He insists. If Ginny is in danger, then she is his sister in all the ways that matter, and Weasleys go together. The compromise they reach is messy and very, very Gryffindor. McGonagall authorizes a controlled descent. Harry, Ron, Hermione if she's recovered in time, Remus as the adult, and a very reluctant Lockhart whose role is mainly bait and plausible deniability. They go in armed with mirrors from the girls' bathroom, instructions from Sirius on serpent anatomy, and a clearer understanding that the handsome boy in the diary, calling himself Tom Riddle, is Voldemort before the name. Pattern interrupt. Imagine the chamber scene where the adult freezes. It isn't Harry, it's Remus, hit with a memory of another basilisk in another war, just long enough for the snake to rear. And in that heartbeat, the children move the way they've been raised to move. Ron shoves Ginny's limp body behind a pillar. Hermione angles her mirror. Harry calls Parseltongue not as a shameful secret, but as a weapon the family has already decided to use. Forks may still come. The sword may still appear. But because there was planning, because there was love and adult backup, the victory feels less miraculous and more earned. When Ginny wakes in the hospital wing, it isn't only Molly clutching her. It's Molly with one hand on her daughter and the other, after a long, trembling moment, on Sirius's shoulder when she learns his advice helped save her child. Gratitude shifts into trust. Trust into family. Dumbledore watches all of this, eyes thoughtful. Harry is still at the center of the crisis, but he is no longer the boy who walks into the dark, because no one else will. He is the boy surrounded by people who refuse to let him go alone. And Dumbledore, who built a plan around one isolated weapon, has to ask himself a new question. What if the prophecy's power has always been collective? Year 3, without the chase. Prisoner of Azkaban rewritten. So when we reach 3rd year in this timeline, the question hanging over Hogwarts isn't who is Sirius Black and why is he after Harry? It's much sharper. It's how long can a boy and his godfather stand against a ministry that would rather fix its mistake by repeating it? This changes everything. In canon, the tension of Prisoner of Azkaban lives in whispers and wanted posters. Here, it lives in official letters, in how Sirius folds a ministry summons with shaking hands while Harry watches, jaw set, because he remembers what Dementors did to the man who tucked him in last night. The Dementors at Hogwarts aren't a vague security measure. They are the thing that nearly ate his family. The misunderstanding is gone. Everyone knows Sirius is free, and with Harry. But because Fudge cannot admit the ministry condemned an innocent man without unraveling a decade of policy, he frames it as protective custody. He insists the Dementors are there to guard the school from Sirius as much as from any external threat. Dumbledore pushes back. McGonagall's nostrils flare. And Harry, this Harry, sits in the corner of the headmaster's office and understands with frightening clarity that his guardian is one bad day away from a cell. So he and Sirius plan. Openly, stubbornly, like Weasleys with better access to Black family parchment. What if, instead of waiting for chance, they hunt the truth? They know Pettigrew is an animagus. They know he was last seen near the Weasleys. That means Ron's threadbare pockets, Ginny's bedside table, the Burrows' kitchen table, are all possible hiding places. The Shrieking Shack isn't a chaotic convergence anymore. It's the endpoint of a mission drawn in Sirius's messy handwriting and Harry's careful notes. This isn't a story about a boy learning a Patronus just to survive Quidditch matches. It's a story about shared ghosts. Lupin stands in that empty classroom and says, "Think of something that will protect you." And Harry thinks of Sirius on the floor of Grimmauld Place, gasping after a panic attack, and of Azkaban's chill pressing through his own bones on the train. Lupin, who loved James and lost him, who almost lost Sirius to the same prison, is not a distant mentor. He is another adult who shakes when the Dementors pass. Their lessons become group therapy disguised as advanced magic. Harry's stag flickers into being the first time he imagines Sirius cleared, laughing in the sun with no Auror watching. Lupin's wolfish grin, when it holds, just for a moment, says more than any speech about love and growing up. When Pettigrew is finally cornered in the shrieking shack, they are not alone. McGonagall is there, rigid with fury. Arthur Weasley, face pale at the thought that a murderer slept in his children's beds. Dumbledore, eyes blazing. Peter is forced back into human form under 4 wands and one shaking boy's voice. The confession isn't shouted in a storm. It's recorded, witnessed, bound by veritaserum and memory charms, ready for the Wisengamot. So what happens when the Ministry's favourite scapegoat suddenly comes with corroborating adults and a living alternative culprit? Fudge can bluster. He can delay. But he cannot quite ignore McGonagall's testimony, Arthur's quiet moral authority, Dumbledore's political weight, and the rat, Animagus, trembling in chains. By the end of this 3rd year, Sirius's name isn't fully cleared yet, but the process has begun. Hearings are scheduled. Azkaban records are requested. Harry is no longer technically an unauthorized ward of a fugitive. He is the center of a legal storm that might, for once, give him more family rather than less. And as the Dementors leave the grounds under Dumbledore's ultimatum, we have to ask, if Sirius walks into 4th year as a nearly cleared man, what does that do to a tournament designed to isolate Harry again? Clearing the name, Sirius as a free man in a dangerous world. So we follow that question straight into marble and torchlight. Picture the Wizengamot chamber, packed to the rafters, the air thick with whispers. What if the mad murderer everyone has feared for over a decade walks in not in chains, but beside Albus Dumbledore, shoulders squared, Harry Weasley Potter at his side? What does a world built on the certainty of his guilt do when that certainty cracks in public, under oath? The hearing is a performance and a reckoning. Pettigrew, pale and shaking, is forced back into his true form under veritaserum, his confessions spilling out in hoarse, broken sentences. The secret keeper, Swap, the street of muggles, the staged finger. Then comes the Animagus proof. 3 registered names from decades ago, 1 unregistered rat demonstrated in front of the full bench, and McGonagall's tight voice confirming that, yes, these boys always were capable of impossible magic when unsupervised. Dumbledore's testimony ties it together. His original doubts, his failure to act, his insistence now that the record be set right. This changes everything. Not because the Wizengamot suddenly becomes just, but because they are cornered by evidence and spectacle. Outside the chamber, the Daily Prophet pivots with almost comical speed. Yesterday's deranged mass murderer is today's wrongly imprisoned war hero, framed in grainy photographs with Harry's hand fisted in his sleeve. The narrative is irresistible. The innocent black heir rotting in Azkaban while a traitor slept in a schoolboy's dormitory. The godfather who escaped not to kill, but to protect his godson. Harry, who has already been framed as a charity case and a Weasley oddity, is suddenly recast as the loyal child who believed in a condemned man before the Ministry did. This Harry is no longer just the boy who lived. He is the boy who stood beside a Black and did not flinch. For the Ministry, it is humiliation in headline form. Cornelius Fudge smiles for the cameras and calls it a triumph of justice. But in private, he rages about Dumbledore grandstanding and irresponsible leaks. He cannot undo the exoneration, so he tries to control the narrative. Selective briefings, hints that the case was complicated, quiet pressure on Amelia Bones. This isn't a story about a system admitting it was wrong. It is a story about a politician deciding that Sirius and Harry are dangerous precisely because they proved him fallible. Legal freedom, though, means parchment and vault keys finally work the way they were meant to. Sirius reclaims the Black fortune formally, not as a fugitive raiding his own house, but as Lord Black with signatures and seals. Grimmauld Place is stripped of its darkest relics under Auror's supervision, then rebuilt into a home rather than a mausoleum. Children's bedrooms opened, a kitchen Molly can tolerate, wards keyed to Weasley and Potter as well as Black. Most importantly, guardianship is no longer a moral claim argued in Dumbledore's office. It is a legal fact the Ministry must acknowledge. Harry's records are amended. Petunia's tenuous hold evaporates. The boy who grew up in a cramped, chaotic burrow now has a second, stranger home that is his by law and by love. And yet, in the quiet after the headlines fade, one truth remains unchanged. Voldemort is still out there, weakened but not gone, bound to a timeline none of them fully understand. Only now, when he calculates his next move, he has to account for two Potters, the child marked by prophecy and the battle-scarred man who has already defied Azkaban, the Ministry, and public opinion for that child's sake. So, let's explore what a resurrected Dark Lord does when the boy he fears comes with an adult who has nothing left to lose. Fire and Dragons, the Triwizard Tournament with a battle-hardened guardian. The World Cup is where the war stops being history and starts feeling imminent. You can almost see it in the way Harry steps into the top box. Not as a tag-along charity case clutching borrowed omnioculars, but as Sirius Black's ward, the godson whose very seating chart is a political statement. What happens when the boy who lived appears flanked by a cleared, battle-hardened Sirius and a watchful Dumbledore in full view of Fudge, Lucius, and half the international delegation? It means the Ministry can't pretend Harry is an abstract symbol anymore. He's a child with a guardian who knows exactly which purebloods toasted Voldemort and who is very willing to stare down a Malfoy without blinking. This changes everything. Not because Harry suddenly becomes a player in Ministry politics, but because everyone else realizes he already is. This Harry has been raised to read a room as much as a Quidditch play. He knows when Sirius's hand tightens on his shoulder, when Dumbledore's eyes go distant at the Bulgarian minister's evasions. So when the dark mark burns green over the campsite, he doesn't just feel fear. He recognizes formation patterns from Sirius's war stories, the way the masked figures herd muggles, the deliberate chaos as cover for a message. He notices which curses are meant to terrorize and which are meant to kill. And unlike Canon, he doesn't keep that to himself. In the smoky aftermath, Harry is giving Dumbledore and Sirius a rapid, precise account. Wand positions, accents, a flash of silver on a mask that might mean a family crest. He names tactics he's heard described at Grimmaild's kitchen table. This isn't a story about a bewildered 14-year-old. It's about a teenager who has been quietly apprenticed into resistance, which is why, when his name erupts from the goblet, Sirius is on his feet before the whispers even crest. The binding contract argument hits a different wall here. Sirius demands to see the enchantments, challenges whether a minor can consent to magical compulsion, insists on an independent investigation into who tampered with an age line that should have held. He doesn't accept that's how it's always been, from a headmaster, a minister, or a judge. Pattern interrupt. Imagine being Barty Crouch Jr. in that room. You planned for a lonely boy with no adult champion, and instead you get a godfather who knows the law, a werewolf who knows combat, and a headmaster who cannot afford another public failure. Harry trains accordingly. Nights in the Room of Requirement with Sirius drilling shield chains and silent casting. Mornings with Remus refining nonverbal disarms, learning to read intent in a duelist's shoulders. He flies the first task with professional-level broom control and a drilled escape plan, not blind improvisation. For the second, he doesn't just dive. He negotiates, leaning on a deeper understanding of magical creatures and the politics of international spectacle to argue for safer parameters and better communication. And yet, the graveyard still comes. The portkey yanks him from a maze he entered, with layered protections and contingency codes agreed upon with Sirius. He lands not as a child blindsided by ritual horror, but as someone who has been told explicitly that Voldemort may return and that resurrection magic is ugly, old, and real. His terror is sharper because he knows what's coming. His choices are cleaner because he's rehearsed them in theory. He moves, he duels, he grabs the cup with a single drilled priority in mind: survive long enough to bring back proof. Which means, when he returns, he doesn't just bring a story of trauma. He brings a strategy meeting the Dark Lord wasn't expecting, marked as his equal, the prophecy in a house full of adults. So when Harry staggers back from the graveyard in this timeline, he doesn't just collapse into shock and let the adults close ranks. He has a godfather who has drilled into him over and over that information is power. And Sirius Black is done letting Albus Dumbledore decide who gets to know the truth. Canon Dumbledore sends Harry back to the Dursleys with half answers and lemon drops. Here, there are no Dursleys to retreat to. No convenient, loveless cupboard to hide a traumatized boy in while the headmaster rearranges the chessboard. There is Grimmauld Place. There is a furious godfather. There is an order that has already watched Harry duel Voldemort and live. Secrecy isn't noble anymore. It's negligent. Dumbledore realizes it almost at once. He sees the way Harry recounts the graveyard duel in clipped, tactical detail. He sees Sirius standing behind him, hand on his shoulder, jaw clenched, not asking for answers, but demanding them. What if, this time, Dumbledore recognizes that the prophecy isn't a private burden between old men and portraits, but a strategic reality this entire household is already bleeding for? So the reveal doesn't happen in a circular office, under the gaze of phoenixes and silver instruments. It happens at the long, scarred table in Grimmauld Place. Sirius on one side, Remus on the other, Molly hovering at the end with a dish towel still in her hands because she refused to be sent away. This isn't a story about a lonely boy being quietly told he has to die. It's a family council. Dumbledore recites the prophecy. The words are the same. The room is not. Marked as his equal, lands differently when Harry has grown up hearing war stories, when Sirius has already explained that prophecies are dangerous precisely because people choose to believe in them. This Harry doesn't gape in bewildered horror. He goes very still, then starts asking questions. What does "either must die" actually mean in practical terms? What are their options? Who else knows? Why was this kept from Sirius when it shaped every decision about Harry's life? His anger is real, but it's not the raw, blindsided betrayal of canon. It's sharper, more strategic. He is furious that his agency was curtailed, not shocked that there was a plan at all. Sirius's fury is less controlled. We can imagine him standing so fast his chair scrapes, demanding to know why a baby had to be raised as a weapon, why he rotted in Azkaban while Dumbledore gambled on blood wards and secrecy. But because he has already done the work of being a parent in this timeline, the rage bends, finally, towards something steadier. He looks at Harry and says, in so many words, that Harry is not a prophecy. He is his son. And that declaration changes the pact that follows. Harry agrees he will fight Voldemort. He doesn't flinch from marked as his equal. He accepts it as one more brutal fact in a life built around war. But he insists, backed by Sirius, by Remus's quiet logic, by Molly's ironclad sense of what children are owed, that he will not be maneuvered alone into danger for the greater good. He will be a partner, not a pawn. This changes everything, because once you treat Harry as a partner, you have to start sharing the rest of the secrets too. And the next one waiting in the shadows is far darker than a single sentence about a boy and a Dark Lord. Order headquarters as home. Grimmauld Place reimagined. Headquarters isn't a shock this time. It's a reveal. When the Order reconvenes and Dumbledore murmurs the address of number 12 Grimmauld Place, Harry doesn't stumble through a rotting hallway in borrowed clothes. He unlocks the door with a wand flick he learned at 11. The wards recognize him. The house exhales. Because in this timeline, Grimmauld Place has been his home for years. This isn't a story about a haunted mausoleum reluctantly pressed into service for a secret war. It's a house that's already survived its own exorcism. Room by room, year by year, Sirius and Harry have stripped curses from banisters and hexes from doorknobs, turning booby traps into training exercises and dark artifacts into carefully catalogued evidence. One bedroom still holds a scorched patch where a cursed music box exploded during a summer lesson. The drawing room, once suffocating with black family portraits, now has a strip of wall where Harry's childhood sketches hang crookedly between two haughty ancestors who pretend not to notice the crayon dragon singeing their gilt frames. Kreacher patrols these corridors too, but his muttering has changed cadence. This Harry, did not meet him for the first time at 15 in the middle of a crisis. He grew up being told, very firmly by Sirius, that house elves are not toys, not friends, and not enemies, but old magic with long memories. Harry learned to say please and thank you, and also, no Kreacher, we are not keeping the cursed tapestry in the dining room. He learned that respect doesn't mean surrender. It means boundaries spoken clearly, again and again, even when Kreacher spits the word blood traitor under his breath. And over time, that mix of reluctant respect and uncompromising lines does what Dumbledore's orders never did in canon. It shifts Kreacher's loyalties. He still polishes the Black family silver with reverence, but he also straightens Harry's crooked sketches when no one is looking. So when the Weasleys arrive, they aren't stepping into an enemy stronghold. They're walking into Harry's kitchen. Watch the power dynamic tilt. Molly, who in another timeline would bustle about as if the house needs her to civilize it, finds a scrubbed table, a simmering pot of stew, and a house elf who snaps that Master Harry has already arranged the guest rooms. Arthur, wide-eyed at the old magic humming in the walls, is guided not by Sirius, but by Harry, who can explain which wards are Black family inheritance and which are new, layered protections he helped cast. Harry isn't the child shooed upstairs while the adults whisper. He's the one pouring tea, sliding into a chair at the war table, because his maps are already spread there. When Moody growls for details, it's Harry who answers with practiced precision. When Dumbledore outlines a mission, he glances at Harry not as an afterthought, but as someone whose tactical instincts have been honed in this very room. And that's where the real tension ignites. Molly's protective instincts crash headlong into Sirius's conviction that you protect children by preparing them, not by pretending the war ends at the kitchen door. She sees a 15-year-old co-strategist. Sirius sees a partner he's been training since Harry first asked what really happened in Godric's Hollow. Every Order meeting becomes a quiet custody battle over Harry's agency. This changes everything, because Order headquarters is no longer a neutral stage where adults perform secrecy and Harry rebels from the margins. It's his home, his history, his chosen family's base of operations. The walls remember his first successful shield charm as clearly as they now record whispered plans about Horcruxes and prophecies. And as the house settles around this reunited army, you can feel it. This isn't just a war room, it's a home base that has been preparing for this fight for years. And it's about to demand a different kind of war from everyone who enters. No more locked doors. Harry, Umbridge, and open rebellion. And when war moves from kitchen tables to classroom corridors, you feel the shift immediately. Because the next battlefield isn't Grimmauld Place or the Ministry. It's Hogwarts. It's a pink cardigan, a simper and a parchment stamped with Fudge's seal. Dolores Umbridge doesn't arrive as a quirky educational nuisance in this timeline. She walks into the Great Hall as a ministry envoy sent to clip 3 wings at once. Dumbledore's authority, Sirius Black's reclaimed reputation, and the political threat of a boy who lived, who has grown up in a house that talks openly about fascism. Harry watches her speech and doesn't just hear progress and standards. He hears Fudge's talking points from the Prophet, the code word Sirius has been dissecting over dinner for months. This changes everything. Canon Harry feels singled out and gaslit. This Harry recognizes a coordinated campaign when he sees one. So when the quill bites into his hand in that first detention, he doesn't swallow it as private shame. He catalogues it. Pressure, duration, wording of the line, Umbridge's exact phrasing when she calls him a liar. That night, while Ron paces and Hermione hovers, Harry sits at the old desk Sirius charmed into his dorm room and writes. Not a diary entry. A report. Subject, educational decree-backed corporal punishment. He titles it because he has watched Remus draft order briefs and he has learned the power of boring, precise language. He sends copies to Sirius, to Remus, to the Weasley twins via the order's secure channels. His scar hurts, his hand hurts, but the hurt is evidence, not a secret. This isn't a story about a boy isolated in an abusive system. It's about a teenager who has been taught that sunlight is a weapon. And the adults respond. Sirius's return letter is equal parts fury and strategy. Detailed questions, a reminder never to be alone with Umbridge if he can help it, and 3 hexes to practice that are technically illegal but extremely useful. Remus's note is gentler, full of grounding techniques for when the detentions trigger graveyard memories, and a quiet postscript. If they won't teach you to defend yourselves, you have a responsibility to each other. So, let's explore Dumbledore's army in a world where the name is almost literal. The Room of Requirement still blooms into existence, but its shelves are different. There are hand-copied Cursebreaker notes from Bill, counter-jinx drills suggested by Tonks, and a set of dueling patterns Sirius annotated with, "Don't show Molly." Harry still leads, but he does it with a command style he learned at home. Everyone's voice matters, everyone gets angry, no one gets left behind. His rage is still there. Cedric is still dead. The prophecy still coils around his future. But because he has spent years being allowed to shout, cry, and argue at the kitchen table without losing anyone's love, that anger bends towards strategy instead of self-destruction. When he snaps at Cho or clashes with Hermione, he circles back, apologizes, recalibrates. He knows relationships are not disposable. He grew up watching Sirius fight to keep every single one. The pattern interrupt comes for Umbridge when she assumes the school will fracture under fear the way it did in canon. She expects whispers, not organized briefings. She doesn't see that every confiscated quill, every cruel decree is being logged, copied, and flown out of the castle by order-protected owls. She doesn't understand that the DA isn't just inspired by Harry's legend. It's backed by adults who send them real spells, real context, real trust. Which means when Hogwarts finally erupts, when fireworks chase her through the corridors and the castle itself seems to rebel, it isn't a spontaneous prank war. It's the first visible sign that this student body has been quietly training for open resistance, and that the Ministry has picked a fight with a school that already thinks of itself as an army. And the next time the Minister tries to use Hogwarts as a pawn, he's going to discover that pawns promoted under pressure don't stay pawns for long, saving the man who lived the Department of Mysteries without a death. So when the vision comes, it doesn't land in the mind of a boy who's been trained to obey pain and panic. It lands in the mind of a teenager who has spent a year questioning authority, cross-checking rumors with Fred and George, and watching the Ministry lie to his face. Canon Harry bolts. This Harry freezes first. He's shaking, he's furious. He's already halfway to the door, and then the habits Sirius and Remus drilled into him during long evenings at Grimmauld Place kick in. Verify. Breathe. Ask who benefits. What if Voldemort is counting on him to do exactly what James Potter's son would do? What if love for family is the bait, not the shield? He doesn't run to Umbridge. He runs to the mirror, because in this timeline, Sirius never leaves that two-way mirror gathering dust in a trunk. He presses it into Harry's hand the first night at headquarters and says, "You don't go charging in alone. You call me." Harry calls. The glass stays stubbornly dark. That's enough to send Canon Harry spiraling. But because this Harry has been taught that one failed channel doesn't equal truth, he pivots. Hermione is already rattling off alternatives. Ron is demanding they check with the Order, and in a cramped, stolen moment in the Room of Requirement, they manage to punch a Patronus message through to Lupin and to Arthur Weasley at the Ministry. This changes everything. The rescue mission that follows isn't 6 students against an army. It's a joint operation, messy and improvised, but coordinated. Teenagers slipping into the Department of Mysteries under the cover of a decoy alarm. Order members apparating to pre-arranged points as soon as the first wards scream. When the doors burst open, Harry isn't alone in the Hall of Prophecy. Sirius is there almost immediately, breathless, wand already moving in the same dueling patterns Harry knows from their evenings clearing cursed heirlooms. They fall into formation without speaking. Harry ducks left because Sirius always covers his right. Sirius hurls a stunner high because Harry prefers to take legs out from under a target. This isn't a story about removing danger. It's a story about what happens when a child who grew up loved meets danger with an army at his back. The veil still waits. The room is still a stone throat, still humming with old, hungry magic. Bellatrix's curse still sends Sirius flying. But instead of disappearing through the arch, he hits the crumbling edge, one arm vanishing through the curtain, as if the world has decided to erase him in pieces. For one terrible second, Harry hears voices whispering his father's name from beyond the veil. Remus hears his own. The magic clings. It wants. Harry reaches him first. Remus anchors Harry's robes with a wordless, desperate spell. Together, they haul Sirius back, and the veil does not let go easily. Sirius comes away with his wand hand blackened and veined with pale, fluttering threads of otherware, a permanent reminder that he has already half-crossed. Harry's forearms are laced with spectral burns that flare when he's too close to death. The atrium confrontation still happens. Voldemort still appears. Fudge still arrives in time to see what he's spent a year denying. Only now the image burned into every prophet front page isn't just Dumbledore dueling Voldemort. It's Harry and Sirius, scorched and shaking, standing between the Dark Lord and the terrified Ministry officials. The world can't pretend this was a hoax. The boy who lived has a living, battle-scarred guardian at his side, and the Ministry has to reckon with both. But the real question is what Voldemort does when he realizes he's not fighting a lonely prophecy child anymore. He's fighting a family that refuses to let go. And that, in the next part of this timeline, is exactly where the war begins to shift. Horcruxes as a family project, planning the final hunt. The war begins to shift in public, at the Ministry. It shifts in private, a week later, in a dim kitchen that once belonged to the Blacks and now belongs, in every way that matters, to Harry's family. What if the conversation Dumbledore postpones until a freezing office in canon happens instead at Grimmauld Place, with Sirius at the table, Remus at his shoulder, and Harry refusing to be sent out for tea? What if the boy who lived doesn't accept "you're too young to understand" as an answer anymore? Dumbledore tries at first. He talks of dark experiments and safeguards against mortality, his voice mild, his hands folded. But Sirius has spent 12 years in Azkaban replaying every choice that led James and Lily to that Halloween. He isn't interested in mild. He presses, meaning what precisely, Albus? Meaning how many fragments of that monster are still out there with Harry's name on them? This isn't a story about a wise old mentor burdened with necessary secrets. Under the combined pressure of Sirius's fury and Harry's quiet, stubborn insistence, "Tell me, or I'll find out alone," Dumbledore lays it out. The diary, already destroyed. A ring from the Gaunt shack. A locket once owned by a woman who signed her name Slytherin. The theory of 7. And finally, the part that makes Sirius go white. The possibility that one Horcrux lives in the scar of the boy sitting 3 chairs down. This changes everything. Not because the prophecy becomes kinder, but because everyone in that room understands at the same moment that Harry's survival is mathematically tied to Voldemort's death. If Voldemort lives, Harry dies. If Voldemort dies, Harry might die with him. There is no version where Harry watches this war from the sidelines. So they treat him as what he already is, a combatant. Strategy sessions at Grimmauld Place stop being order meetings that Harry overhears and start being war councils where his voice is central. Around the scarred table, they map Tom Riddle's life the way you or I might map a childhood neighborhood. Hogwarts, Little Hangleton, Borgin and Berks. The orphanage, Hermione brings books. Remus brings memories. Sirius brings the bitter knowledge of pure blood heirlooms and how obsessively they're guarded. This Harry doesn't just nod along. He's the one who points out that the diary targeted Ginny's innocence, that the ring ties Voldemort back to his despised Muggle father, that the locket reeks of old black magic and family shame. He asks the questions Canon Harry doesn't get to ask until much later. If he split his soul, why those anchors? What do they say about what he still loves, even now? Trust in this timeline means fewer locked doors. It means Dumbledore explaining plainly why Harry's blood mattered, why the killing curse rebounded, Why Harry's ability to love is literally the variable Voldemort cannot calculate. It means everyone at that table sharing the risk of knowing the full equation. For Sirius, that knowledge is a knife. Every plan they make has a line where Harry's name appears next to words like infiltration, contact, bait. Every time his first instinct is to cross it out, to say, absolutely not. I didn't crawl out of Azkaban to march my godson toward a grave. But because he knows the prophecy now, not as a distant riddle, but as the logic of the war, he also knows what it would mean to pretend Harry isn't central. It would mean lying. It would mean leaving Harry ignorant and therefore unprepared. It would mean repeating James's greatest fear, that someone else would decide for his son. So Sirius does something harder than throwing himself in front of a curse. He stays in the room. He listens to Harry argue for his own agency. He lets Remus, voice steady, say, "We can't protect him by pretending he isn't already in danger. We can only protect him by making sure he's ready." By the end of August, the War Council has a concrete plan. The diary is gone. A known variable removed. The ring, Dumbledore insists, is his responsibility. He will retrieve and destroy it before term, with Sirius and Remus as backup, not spectators. The locket becomes the family mission. Regulus's room is turned over inch by inch. Creature is questioned with a gentleness he has never received. Mundungus Fletcher's wanderings are traced. And 6th year at Hogwarts isn't framed around private lessons where Dumbledore drips out memories on his own schedule. It's framed around a shared hunt, a clear target, and a boy who walks back through the castle doors knowing that the next Horcrux they destroy will be one his godfather's brother died to steal. Which raises a new question for this timeline. What happens when Harry meets Slughorn and recognizes instantly the man who once told Tom Riddle how to tear his soul apart? Half-blood prince, whole household, 6th year with backup. Harry meets Slughorn with a face that looks far too much like James Potter's, but he walks into that office carrying something James never had at 16. A working knowledge of Horcruxes and the man who made them. This changes everything. Because when Slughorn drops Tom Riddle's name with that indulgent little chuckle, Harry doesn't just feel curiosity or vague unease. He feels the weight of Regulus's locket in his pocket, the echo of Sirius's voice saying very quietly over the kitchen table at Grimmauld Place, "There were teachers who helped him, kid. Some of them never meant to." So the 6th year we know from canon, the one that's half potions lessons and half romantic chaos, still exists, but it's threaded through with a different kind of vigilance. Harry is still a teenager, still tripping over his own feelings for Ginny every time she laughs at practice, still bristling when Cormac McLaggen eyes the keeper spot and Ginny in the same breath. He still has to study for NEWT level classes and argue with Ron about defensive formations. But because he has a godfather who drags him out for late-night tea by the fire and asks, bluntly, "Is this about Quidditch or about the war?" the pressure doesn't calcify into the same lonely, desperate edge. And then the Half-Blood Prince arrives. In canon, that book is a revelation and a seduction. Here, it's a temptation Harry has been trained to interrogate. This Harry, This Harry grew up hearing Sirius and Remus dissect old Black family grimoires, asking who wrote this spell, who it was meant to protect, who it was meant to hurt. So when the annotated textbook starts handing him shortcuts and borderline dark hexes, he uses them, but he also copies them down to show Remus, tests them in controlled dueling club drills, and asks, again and again, where did this magic come from? Pattern interrupt. Imagine Harry, not Snape, being the one to say in a crowded classroom, power without context is exactly how Tom Riddle started. That's the boy Sirius raised. Dumbledore's private lessons shift too. They're still in that high, cold office, still full of swirling memories. And Tom Riddle's careful charm, but the secrecy is thinner. Before term even starts, Sirius sits across from Dumbledore at Grimmauld Place and says, "You can show him the worst of it, but you will not send him back to his dorm alone afterward." The compromise they reach means Harry debriefs in the kitchen later, hands wrapped around hot chocolate, while Sirius and Molly listen to him untangle what it means to watch a child turn into a monster. Because this isn't a story about shielding Harry from the truth. It's a story about not making him carry that truth in isolation. That same training changes how he reads Draco. In canon, Harry's suspicion is accurate but dismissed as obsession. Here, he recognizes the pattern. A boy his age, cornered by a charismatic tyrant, given an impossible task. He doesn't just stalk Draco. He writes detailed notes, dates, overheard fragments about the cabinet and repairing it, and takes them to McGonagall, to Remus, to Sirius. He still sneaks into Borgin and Burke's under the invisibility cloak, but this time there's an adult waiting in the leaky cauldron when he comes out. The vanishing cabinet plot still crawls forward, but the Order is watching the 7th floor more closely. Fred and George, home from their shop, trade whispered theories with Harry about passageways and paired artifacts. They do not stop Draco. Yet, they do change the response plan. And over all of it hangs Dumbledore's blackened hand, and that ring, Harry now knows, was a Horcrux. The headmaster is still dying. The tower is still coming. But this Harry walks toward that night, having been told explicitly that he will need to lead others, not abandon them. He has practiced saying, "We decide this together," at kitchen tables and in crowded common rooms. So when Dumbledore finally falls, the boy on the other side of that wand is not an unprepared child weaponized by love alone. He is a Weasley-raised, black-mentored strategist who has been taught deliberately how to survive the shattering of his last great protector. Which leaves us with the next fracture in this timeline. What happens to a war when the lightning bolt orphan refuses to be anyone's lone martyr? The Tower and the choice. Dumbledore's death with Sirius in the wings. We open not with a surprise, but with a quiet, terrible certainty. By the time Harry and Dumbledore stand on that cliff above the inferi-filled lake, this Harry has been told the truth in a way Canon Harry never was. Dumbledore has sat in Grimmauld Place's dim kitchen with Sirius on one side, Molly on the other, and said plainly, "This mission may be my last." What if your headmaster didn't hide his mortality behind twinkling eyes, but named it prepared his boy for it, and then still asked him to come? This changes everything. Not because it makes the potion hurt less, or the screaming in the cave any quieter, but because Harry walks into that horror, already rehearsing what comes after. He knows the Horcrux hunt cannot die with an old man in a green bottle. He has been taught relentlessly that war is a relay, not a solo. So when Dumbledore is weakened on the tower, wand hand hanging useless, Harry's terror is different. He is not shocked that death has finally come for this frail, brilliant general. He is horrified that it has come tonight. The paralysis spell still holds him. Snape still arrives. The Avada Kedavra still arcs green against the sky. Some anchors are too deep in the story to move, but because Sirius and Remus have spent years drilling him on extraction over vengeance, on retreat and regroup instead of blind pursuit, Harry's next choices are not Cannon's rooftop chase. He doesn't sprint after Snape screaming, wand flailing, broadcasting his position to every Death Eater on the grounds. He moves to the stairwell, to the DA coins, to the communication protocols Sirius insisted on once he realized his godson's school kept turning into a battlefield. Down below, those same order channels are already humming. McGonagall's Patronus has gone to Grimmauld. Kingsley has sent a coded message. Sirius, who once would have charged in alone, now apparates to Hogsmeade with Tonks and a pre-agreed plan. They are not there in time to stop the killing curse, but they are there in time to help seal corridors, to reinforce Flitwick's wards, to intercept a fleeing Death Eater at the gates before he can hex a group of terrified second years. This isn't a story about a school abandoned to chaos. It's about a community that has rehearsed catastrophe. In the aftermath, the difference is quieter, but even more profound. Canon Harry, standing over Dumbledore's body, is a boy whose last real parent figure has just been taken. Here, grief hits just as hard, but it doesn't hollow him out into a martyr-shaped shell. He has Sirius's hand on his shoulder, Molly's arms around him when the Weasleys arrive, Remus's steady presence cataloguing what Dumbledore told them about Horcruxes and what he did not. Harry mourns a mentor, not a final guardian. That means when the question comes, do we continue the hunt? He doesn't hear it as a demand to die on schedule. He hears it as the next move in a long game his family has been training for since he was 11. We leave them in the ruined headmaster's office. Portraits murmuring, forks gone, the silver instruments silent. Harry, Sirius, Hermione, Ron, Ginny, Remus, McGonagall. No prophecy speech, no elder wizard orchestrating, just a Weasley-raised, black-mentored strategist laying his hand on the cracked desk and saying, "We do this, but on our terms." So, let's explore what those terms actually look like when the Ministry, the Order, and Voldemort all realize that Hogwarts' broken tower has not produced a broken boy. Camping with a pack, the Horcrux hunt as a group effort. We don't cut from that slammed palm on McGonagall's desk to Harry vanishing into the woods with a tent and a bad attitude. In this timeline, when the war goes underground, Harry refuses to go underground alone. He tries once. The old instinct is there. Disappear. Protect them. Carry it all yourself. But because he has been raised in a house where adults actually look him in the eye and say, "You are not doing this by yourself," he doesn't get far. Molly blocks the door. Arthur asks one quiet question. If Sirius had tried to hunt Voldemort alone at 17, what would you have said? And this Harry hears himself answer that he was being an idiot. So the Horcrux hunt becomes a unit, not a martyrdom. Harry, Ron, Hermione, Sirius and Remus form what Kingsley half-jokingly calls the Marauder Task Force. Small enough to move, old enough to choose. Dangerous enough together that Voldemort should probably be worried. This isn't a story about 3 traumatized teenagers slowly starving by a riverbank. It's a story about a godfather who refuses to let his boys sleep in a freezing tent while there is an ancestral townhouse sitting empty in London. Grimmauld Place changes everything. Not because it's comfortable, it isn't, but because Black family wards and Black family magic give them something Canon Harry never had. A logistical backbone. There are safe houses Sirius inherited and never talked about, bolt holes Regulus used, attics layered with wards that predate the ministry itself. Hermione still pores over books. She just does it at a kitchen table where Creature delivers tea and mutters about proper Black war work, instead of in the dark with a dying radio. They plan, they rotate. They don't camp for weeks in one place because Remus, who remembers the First War, snaps that stationary targets die. So the locket isn't a desperate snatch and grab from Umbridge. It's a ministry infiltration where Sirius, in dog form, rides the lifts unnoticed, while Hermione's forged paperwork buys them 10 precious minutes in the death chamber. The cup at Gringotts is not a blind leap onto a dragon's back. It's a coordinated raid where Sirius's knowledge of old pure-blood vault politics and Bill's curse-breaking mean they walk in knowing the security schema. Does that mean it's smooth? Not remotely. The arguments are sharper precisely because there are more adults in the room. Sirius wants to move fast, to hit the diadem the moment they confirm it's in Hogwarts. Remus warns about students as collateral. Hermione insists on verifying that the crown is a Horcrux before they risk an assault on the castle. Harry, who in canon was forced into command, now has to learn something harder. How to share it. The diadem retrieval, run under the cover of a Hogsmeade weekend, and McGonagall's quiet cooperation nearly collapses when the Room of Requirement seals itself around Fiendfire Remus can't fully control. Harry still walks through smoke, choking on the thought that he's going to lose someone he loves in a cupboard full of junk. But because Sirius is there, because Hermione has drilled them on backup plans, they get out with burns instead of bodies. By the time the diadem lies cracked on a Black family altar stone and the cup hisses itself into nothing in the kitchen sink, they can count what's left. Diary, ring, locket, cup, diadem, Harry, and Nagini. One snake, one soul piece, and a Dark Lord who has finally realized that his immortality is failing. As reports come in, Snatchers massing, Death Eaters consolidating at Hogwarts, Severus Snape turning the castle into a garrison, the group understands the shape of the endgame. The last Horcrux isn't hidden in a vault or a forest. It's going to war, and it's waiting for them at Hogwarts. The Battle of Hogwarts. A family defends its own. Hogwarts doesn't feel like a school anymore. It feels like a fortress that remembers what it was built for. Stone humming with wards, windows blazing with defensive charms, corridors crowded not with gossiping students, but with fighters lacing their fear into purpose. What if the last Horcrux isn't just waiting for them at Hogwarts, but daring them to come take it? What does it mean when the final battle happens in the one place that taught them who they are? This changes everything, because this time Harry doesn't arrive as a half-starved boy clutching a wand and a handful of friends. He arrives as the point of an army made of family. We see it in the way the defenders assemble, McGonagall and Flitwick turning staircases into traps, the Weasleys forming a red-haired phalanx, from Bill and Fleur at the doors to Ginny slipping into the shadow of the battlements. And behind them, the reformed Black household, Andromeda, Ted, Tonks, Remus, even a grim-faced creature, slotting in with the Order as if this was always the end of their particular redemption arc. And Sirius? Sirius is on the front lines because there is nowhere else he will agree to be. He's dueling Dolohov and Rookwood in rapid succession, trading curses with men he once called comrades, every movement a refutation of the house he grew up in. But because this isn't a story about a reckless godfather dying for drama, we keep cutting back to his eyes. He's always scanning the chaos for one figure, black hair, Weasley jumper under dragonhide, moving with a professionalism that makes Sirius both proud and quietly horrified. Pattern interrupt. Harry isn't in the thickest fighting. He's moving through it. This Harry has spent years being taught that leadership means delegation, not martyrdom. So when Neville takes command of the student fighters barking orders in the room of requirement, Harry lets him. We watch Neville blow the bridge, rally the DA, stand in the courtyard with a sword of Gryffindor and the weight of a prophecy he doesn't fully know pressing on his shoulders. He is not a backup chosen one here. He is a general. McGonagall's stand is the spine of the castle's defense. She animates statues, duels 3 Death Eaters at once. And when she snaps that, they will protect the students or die trying. We feel the way growing up under her and Molly's overlapping authority has shaped Harry's sense of what adults are for. They are shields, not puppet masters. And then there's Molly versus Bellatrix, but framed differently in this timeline. Bellatrix taunts not just Ginny, but the entire knot of Weasleys and Blacks around her. Blood traitors, half-bloods, the disgrace of the family line. When Molly steps forward with that famous line, she is defending a clan that has already claimed Harry as its own. And Harry is close enough to see it, close enough to choose not to intervene, because he trusts her. This isn't a story about Harry doing everything alone. It's about him finally being able to focus on the mission, finding Nagini, tracking Voldemort's movements, listening when Hermione says, quietly, that the last step is his, which is how we end with a familiar image, made unfamiliar. Harry, slipping away from the Great Hall after Voldemort's ultimatum, walking toward the Forbidden Forest. But this time, he carries not the certainty that he is disposable, but the unbearable knowledge that Sirius, Molly, Arthur, Ron, Ginny, an entire messy, stitched-together family will break when he falls. He goes anyway. So, Let's explore what it means to choose death when you finally believe your life has value. Into the forest, not alone, redefining the ultimate sacrifice. He walks into the forest anyway, but in this timeline, he is not walking out of emptiness. He is walking out of abundance, and that changes what it means to die. Canon Harry went to Voldemort, half convinced that his death was the only good thing he could still offer the world. This Harry has spent 17 years with Sirius Black, leaning back in threadbare armchairs, saying things like, "There's a difference between throwing your life away and staking it, kid. One's despair, one's a choice." Which voice do you think is louder in his head now? Vernon Dursley's contempt or Sirius's rough-edged tenderness? So as he leaves the castle, his internal monologue isn't, "I deserve this." It's a running tally of conversations. Sirius telling him the first time they really talked about Godric's Hollow, your mum didn't die, so you'd grow up feeling guilty for breathing. She died so you'd get the chance to breathe. Remus, over tea, quietly adding, "Bravery without choice is just tragedy. Bravery with choice is something else." Molly, hands on his shoulders after some near miss. "Don't you dare make yourself a martyr to spare my feelings, Harry James." What if all of that is echoing as he fingers the snitch and whispers, "I am about to die"? What if he can tell the difference between martyrdom and necessity because they have literally diagrammed it at the kitchen table, with Sirius sketching out the prophecy on a napkin and saying, "If it comes to it, you choose, not fate. You hear me?" When the resurrection stone turns, it is not just a summoning of the dead, it is a roll call of his entire life. James and Lily appear, yes, and Remus and Sirius. Sirius twice over, in memory and in ghostly presence. But they do not arrive to fill a void. They arrive to stand alongside a boy whose heart is already crowded. The script in his head runs Ginny's laugh on a loop, Ron's offended squawk at being left out of anything dangerous, Hermione's exasperated, "Honestly, Harry," as she shoves a book into his hands. He thinks of the Weasleys at the burrow table, arguing over potatoes and politics. He isn't walking towards Voldemort to finally be worthy of love. He is walking because he already knows, down to the bone, that he is loved and that this means something. This isn't a story about a boy trying to pay the universe back for kindness it never gave him. This is a story about someone raised in love, choosing, with terrifying clarity, to put his body between that love and annihilation. So when the clearing opens and Voldemort lifts his wand, Harry's acceptance is not laced with self-loathing. Sirius has prepared him for this possibility in the only way that matters, by spending years insisting that Harry's life has value even if he never lifts a wand in anger again. Because he believes that, he can lay that life down without secretly agreeing with Voldemort that he is expendable. The killing curse hits a chest that has known steady arms, not just cupboard walls. His last conscious thought is not good. It's over, but tell them, "I'm sorry." It's tell them, "I chose this." He falls. The forest holds him. From the outside, the image is familiar. A boy lying motionless on the leaf-strewn ground. But because we know who raised him, we also know this changes everything. The Harry who will open his eyes in that strange white King's Cross is not the same weapon Canon forged. So what does a boy who has already been given a family do when death offers him a way back? We're not done in the forest yet. After the wand falls, a post-war world with Sirius and Harry. When Harry comes back, he doesn't walk into a sea of reaching hands and awestruck strangers. He walks into the Great Hall and straight into his people. In canon, that moment is a coronation. The boy who lived again paraded in front of a shell-shocked crowd, already being claimed by a new political order. Here, the image is messier and more intimate. The benches are scorched, the enchanted ceiling is a patchwork of smoke and dawn, and the dead are lined in careful rows. But because Sirius escaped early, because he raised Harry, the first thing that happens is not the minister's handshake. It's a godfather's tackle. Sirius barrels across the flagstones, half laughing, half sobbing, and then he's shaking. One hand in Harry's hair, one gripping his shoulders, searching his face as if he can physically confirm the Horcrux is gone. Relief hits first, huge and choking. Then the anger arrives. "What were you thinking, pup?" is not a rhetorical question. You can hear every Azkaban year in it. Every night he watched Harry sleep under a Fidelius and still feared it wouldn't be enough. This Harry doesn't flinch from the fury because he knows exactly what it's made of. Love and terror braided tight. And right there, in the middle of the wreckage, Sirius makes a second vow. The first was over a crib, in a borrowed flat, promising James and Lily's son he would never be alone again. The new one is quieter and far more radical. Harry will not be eaten alive by the legend that nearly killed him. He will have a life that is not a public utility. This changes everything about the Ministry's next move. In canon, Harry is a traumatized teenager with no legal guardian, no real understanding of his own economic power, and a lifetime of being trained to accept adult decisions. Here, he walks back into the world as Harry Blackpotter, heir to an ancient pureblood house and the Potter's gold, with a guardian who grew up in those corridors of influence and remembers every trick. So when Kingsley's interim government tries to sweep him into photo opportunities, they hit a wall. Not rudeness, but boundaries. Harry will testify, yes. He will stand up in the Great Hall and name Death Eaters, yes. But Sirius is at his shoulder, Remus on his other side, and they insist on proper trials, not Dementor's kiss by headline. This isn't a story about easy catharsis. It's about a boy raised to believe that justice means more than revenge, and a man who has lived the consequences of a justice system built on fear. Together they argue for Azkaban reform, for interrogating how a prison that couldn't even hold an unregistered animagus was ever allowed to become the cornerstone of wizarding punishment. They push for Muggle-born reparations, for oversight of Auror tactics, for an end to the quiet policies that made it possible to call children mudblood in school and then recruit them or discard them in war. Does everyone welcome this? Of course not. There are purebloods who resent a black heir dismantling the old order, bureaucrats who bristle at a teenager reading his own legal briefs, even some survivors who want swift vengeance, not nuance. But because Harry isn't isolated, those pressures don't get to define him. There's Andromeda in Wizengamot robes. There's McGonagall refusing to let Hogwarts become a propaganda stage. There's a whole constellation of people who have known him since he tripped over his own feet in Buckbeak's paddock. And when the speeches end and the bodies are buried, when the owls stop bringing desperate requests, and the prophet finds a new headline, we finally get the quiet that canon never really allowed him. Back at Grimmauld Place, the house is almost unrecognizable. Creature has filled the kitchen with steam and the smell of proper stew. The screaming portraits are gone, replaced by photographs. James and Lily on a broom, baby Harry on Sirius's shoulders, a candid shot of the two of them asleep in armchairs during some long-ago order meeting. Harry stands in the doorway, still in torn battle robes, and for the first time in his remembered life, the future is a blank page instead of a countdown. No prophecy. No training schedule. No next mission. What do we do now? He asks. And it's not the question of a weapon waiting for orders. It's a boy asking his dad how to live. Sirius considers. Then he says the most subversive thing a man from his timeline can say. We learn how to be ordinary for a bit. We figure out who we are when we're not preparing you to die. So, let's explore what it actually means to let Harry Potter grow up in that world. One where the war is over, but the work of unlearning it has only just begun. Who Harry becomes. Character, career, and chosen family. So what kind of man steps out of that long, strange adolescence? The one where his godfather lived, the war still came, and then, miraculously, it ended before it could eat him whole. What if we follow this Harry, past the rubble and memorials and into the quieter, harder question? Who does he choose to be when no one is pointing a wand at his chest? Canon Harry becomes an Auror almost by default. He's good at defense. He's famous for fighting Voldemort. The Ministry wants a symbol. This changes everything. Because Sirius has spent years drilling into him that his worth isn't measured in dark wizards defeated, Harry actually pauses. Does he want to chase Death Eaters for the rest of his life? Or does he want to make sure there are fewer Death Eaters to chase in the first place? In one timeline, he joins the Aurors, but pushes for trauma-informed training, proper oversight, and real rehabilitation. In another, he sidesteps the badge entirely, taking a reform post in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, using black gold and Potter clout to drag the institution into the century. And there's always the wild card. The young man who loved teaching DA lessons, who might one day walk back into Hogwarts as defense professor, not as a punishment, but as a choice. This isn't a story about Harry being magically cured of every flaw. He still has a temper. He still carries nightmares, but because he's grown up watching Sirius and Remus, if Remus lives, argue, apologize, and repair, he has a language for conflict that Canon Harry never did. Romance, then, whether with Ginny, who has known both the boy and the man, or with someone entirely different, doesn't have to be a series of panicked retreats and noble breakups. He can say, "I'm afraid," instead of just disappearing into his own head. He can hear, "You hurt me," and not translate it into, "You're better off without me." The Weasleys remain his anchor. Molly still fusses. Arthur still marvels at Muggle plugs. And Harry still walks into the burrow without knocking, because it is home even if he technically lives at Grimmauld Place. Pattern interrupt. We don't erase that red-haired chaos just because Sirius got there first. We expand it. If Remus survives, he becomes the quiet uncle who understands both the war and the aftermath. If he doesn't, Teddy grows up half at Andromeda's, half trailing after Harry and Sirius, absorbing a new model of what it means to be claimed by many. When Harry has children of his own, the real experiment begins. He is ruthless about one thing: no locked doors, no whispered prophecies in the next room, no sending a child into danger armed only with half-truths and a sacrificial destiny. He tells them the story of James and Lily, of the Blacks who harmed and the Blacks who healed, of a world that almost asked him to die, and a godfather who insisted he learn to live. Christmas at their house means treacle tart next to blood sausage, Gryffindor scarves piled on an old black family settee, a wall of moving photographs that show both Potters and Blacks, Weasleys and Lupins, all jumbled together. In the end, he is still the boy who lived. The prophecy doesn't vanish. The scar doesn't fade. But he is also the man who got to grow up, with a dad who stayed, a family that multiplied instead of narrowed, and a future that isn't just an epilogue on a platform. And in this timeline, that difference matters more than any spell. Who Sirius becomes, from runaway heir to reluctant patriarch. If Harry gets to grow up, Sirius has to learn how. This isn't a story about the cool godfather who swoops in for Hogsmeade weekends and joke presents. This Sirius is there for the tantrums, the nightmares, the awkward questions about why other kids have mums, and he doesn't. And because he's there, he can't keep running from the boy he was, or the house that made him. So where does the healing start? Not with grand gestures, but with Remus making tea in a kitchen that still whispers with Wahlburger's shrieks. Therapy in this timeline looks like midnight conversations at Grimmauld Place, the two of them sitting at that long table, naming what canon never let them name. Survivor's guilt, misplaced rage. The way Azkaban lingers in the way Sirius flinches at sudden footsteps. Remus asks, very gently, what if Harry sees that? What if Harry learns that fear is something you drown in fire whiskey or fling at your enemies? That question changes everything. Because Sirius doesn't want this Harry who trusts adults by default, to inherit a legacy of unprocessed pain. So he does the unthinkable. He reclaims Grimmauld Place instead of burning it down. He takes down the family tapestry and leaves the wall bare for weeks, then invites Harry to help decide what goes up. Photos of the Potters, the Weasleys, Order members, a Muggle-born study group he funds after the war. He walks past the spot where his name was blasted off and thinks, very stubbornly, I live here. My kid lives here. We change what this house means. Raising Harry forces Sirius to grow up in ways the Marauders never had to. Someone has to balance black accounts, argue with goblins about guardianship, and quietly funnel money to the Weasleys without insulting their pride. Someone has to research primary schools, talk to McGonagall about early transfiguration lessons, and sit through parent meetings where he's the only wizard in dragon-hide boots. He learns to cook a few reliable meals, to mend robes, to braid hair on mornings when Ginny stays over and Molly is exhausted. Emotional labor becomes a discipline, naming feelings, apologizing first, modeling that anger doesn't mean abandonment. After Voldemort falls, he doesn't retreat. He leverages the very thing he once despised: black wealth. What if that vault, instead of rotting under Malfoy influence, becomes seed money for Muggle-born legal aid? For a scholarship fund in Lily and James's names? For a network of safe houses for war orphans? He and Andromeda quietly coordinate placements. And every so often, another frightened kid ends up at Grimmauld for the summer, learning that family can be something you arrive at, not just what you're born into. Old grudges don't vanish, but they bend. With the Weasleys, Sirius shifts from the reckless friend who leads their son into danger to the co-parent who signs permission slips and shows up to denome the garden. With McGonagall, detentions give way to late-night strategy sessions, two veterans arguing policy over tea while a sleeping Harry drools on Sirius's shoulder. Even with Snape, the hatred is complicated by the sight of Harry brewing with Lily's precision and James's grin. In this timeline, Sirius has to ask himself, again and again, who he's really punishing. Decades later, we find him at a crowded table in a bright, decursed Grimmauld dining room. Children shout over one another. Adults pass dishes. Someone's toddler is feeding peas to an extremely patient greying Padfoot under the table. Sirius throws his head back and laughs, the sound echoing where his mother's portrait once screamed. He looks around, at Harry telling a story with his hands, at Ginny rolling her eyes, at Teddy arguing with a Weasley cousin about Quidditch. And you can see the moment it hits him. This is the family he always wanted and never expected to deserve. But if this is where he ends up, what happens when the next war doesn't knock politely at the door and the man who finally learned to stay has to decide whether to lead the charge or hold the line at home? What we lose, what we gain. Comparing canon and AU Harry, so when that future Harry stands in a crowded kitchen trying to decide whether to lead the charge or hold the line, we need to pause and ask, who is the boy making that choice? What did this timeline give him and take away to get him here? Because this is where the comparison between canon Harry and AU Harry gets sharp. In canon, Harry's life starts in a cupboard, in hunger and contempt and the constant message that he is an intrusion. In this what if, there is no cupboard under the stairs, no Dursley abuse graphing itself onto his nervous system. There is a living, present Sirius who escaped Azkaban early, a godfather who shows up at Privet Drive, refuses to leave, and eventually wins the right to raise him. There is an early informed Harry who knows the words Voldemort, Order of the Phoenix, and war before he knows long division. And there is a Dumbledore who collaborates rather than withholds, looping Sirius and the reformed Order into Harry's upbringing instead of watching from a distance. This changes everything. Not because it makes Harry's life easy, but because it rewrites the emotional grammar of his heroism. Canon Harry walks into Hogwarts as an outsider twice over, abused by muggles, ignorant of wizarding norms, and instantly famous for something he doesn't remember. His humility is raw, born from never expecting a second portion of anything. His perspective on both worlds is edged with shock, at how cruel muggles can be and how casually prejudiced wizards are. And his chosen one status is lonely in a way that's almost architectural. The whole story keeps building rooms where only he can stand. Our AU Harry loses some of that. This Harry doesn't flinch when adults raise their voices because Sirius never weaponized anger. He isn't quite as stunned by kindness or as baffled by the idea that anyone would want him around. He doesn't arrive at Hogwarts as the boy who has nothing. He arrives as the boy who already belongs to someone. That means less of Canon Harry's aching outsider gaze, less of that stark, almost mythic isolation. But what he gains is equally important. Growing up with Sirius means a secure attachment style instead of a survival strategy. It means better emotional regulation because an adult actually sits with him through nightmares about green light instead of locking him in a cupboard. It means a stronger sense of boundaries. This Harry has watched Sirius tell Dumbledore no, has seen the Order argue as equals, and understands that love does not require self-erasure. His model of heroism is rooted in family and community. A godfather, a ragtag order, a network of adults who protect him and let him protect them, rather than in deprivation. This isn't a story about saying one boy is better than the other. Both versions of Harry are valid explorations of resilience. Canon Harry shows us how a neglected child can still choose goodness, can still walk into the forest and meet death with open arms. AU Harry shows us how a loved child can choose sacrifice without disappearing into it, can step forward while still believing he deserves to come back. So, let's explore what it means to prefer one over the other. Does the cupboard-born hero resonate more? Or the godson raised in a house full of laughter and war stories? And what does that choice reveal about the stories we crave when we think about healing, about power, and about what a saved world should actually feel like? The power of one knock on a door. So we circle back to that image, a gaunt man on a neat suburban street, hand lifted toward a very normal door. One knock, one decision, one godfather who refuses to walk away this time. Because that's where this timeline really breaks from canon, isn't it? Not in a grand battle or a prophecy chamber, but in a quiet act of courage on Privet Drive. Sirius Black, freshly escaped and half-broken, chooses to knock instead of run. He confronts Dumbledore, Petunia, the Ministry, the whole brittle system that says Harry belongs in a cupboard and Sirius belongs in a cell. This changes everything. Trace the line from that knuckle on painted wood. Harry's first time on a broom isn't a stolen moment with a school broom on a manicured lawn. It's Sirius laughing himself hoarse in a hidden field, teaching him how to bank and roll, because flying should feel like freedom, not rebellion. No McGonagall catching a desperate boy breaking rules, but a guardian deliberately building skill and joy into his childhood. This Harry learns that power can be practiced safely, openly, with someone cheering instead of shouting. Fast forward to the Shrieking Shack. In canon, it's chaos and coincidence, children stumbling into a decades-old tragedy. Here, it's a mission. Sirius, Remus, and a better-informed Harry plan it out. Map routes, safe words, contingency spells. Ron and Hermione aren't accidental hostages. They're briefed allies. The confrontation with Pettigrew still hurts, still bleeds, but it's framed by preparation instead of panic. The same haunted room, the same werewolf scars in the walls, but a different lesson about what grown-ups owe the children they drag into their wars. And the Department of Mysteries, imagine it without a death. Not because this world is kinder, but because information is shared. Harry doesn't sprint after a vision alone. Sirius and the Order have already deconstructed the prophecy with him at Grimmauld Place, explaining what it means and what it doesn't. They set protocols. They teach him how to question the images in his mind. When the trap springs, it catches a unit, not a boy and his friends. There are injuries, curses, terror. But Sirius lives, winded and furious, and still making terrible jokes on the way out. This isn't a story about erasing pain, it's about redistributing it. The fear Petunia once carried alone becomes something the whole adult circle faces together. The burden that sat entirely on Harry's shoulders is shared by a godfather, a werewolf, an old headmaster forced to be honest years earlier. Shared grief doesn't vanish, but it becomes bearable when the house is full and the table is long. Underneath all the plot mechanics, the thematic core is simple and sharp. Who raises you matters. Love and information are forms of power. Systems built on secrecy and neglect can be challenged when one person decides to show up and keep showing up. Sirius knocking on that door doesn't guarantee a happy ending. It just proves that endings can be different. And that's the deeper what if humming under this whole exercise. If one man on one night can change the entire trajectory of a war by refusing to disappear, what does that say about the quieter doors in our own lives, waiting for someone to knock? If you could rewrite one night in your story, because here's the quiet twist. This isn't only a story about Harry and Sirius. This changes everything only if we let it echo beyond the shrieking shack and the ministry atrium and into the much smaller rooms we've actually lived in. Most of us have had our own Privet Drive nights, not with Dementors hovering or wands drawn, but with a phone that didn't ring, a text we didn't send, a door we didn't walk through, a moment where a different knock, a different choice could have changed the whole shape of a friendship, a family, a life. Canon Harry spends that night in a cupboard. This Harry hears a motorbike in the distance and a hand on the doorframe saying, "I'm here, I'm staying." So what if we sit with that for a second? Not the magic, not the prophecy, just the choice to show up. Sirius is exhausted, traumatized, half-starved from Azkaban, and still he drags himself to Privet Drive because one small boy needs him. This isn't a story about a flawless godfather swooping in with perfect timing. It's about everyday courage, wearing a leather jacket and shaking slightly while it knocks. When you think back over your own timeline, who did that for you? Who was the person who drove across town, who sat in the ugly waiting room chair, who answered the midnight message and didn't make you apologize for needing them? And just as sharply, where might you be able to be that person now? You may never have to face down a werewolf or a Death Eater, but you might be the one who makes sure a kid doesn't spend their metaphorical childhood in a cupboard they can't name. Fan fiction and what-ifs are not an escape from reality so much as a rehearsal for better worlds. When we rewrite Azkaban so that Sirius escapes earlier, when we drag the Ministry's negligence into the light, when we imagine a legal system that actually listens to a wrongly imprisoned man, we're practicing empathy. We're testing how love and care might move through the same damaged systems, without pretending those systems magically disappear. So, let's explore together in the comments. If you could rewrite one night in the series, which would it be? The Halloween in Godric's Hollow, the graveyard in Little Hangleton, the Department of Mysteries, the Astronomy Tower? How do you think this AU, with a Harry raised by a present, battle-scarred Sirius, would handle that moment differently than canon? What does it mean if he walks into those scenes already knowing he's loved, already knowing he's not alone? And then bring it closer. In your own story, where could you be someone serious? Someone who knocks, who stays, who raises a different kind of hero simply by refusing to disappear? Join the pack. Share, subscribe, and shape the next what if, because that's the question, isn't it? We've walked this whole alternate timeline asking what if Sirius Black escaped Azkaban early, knocked on that neat little door on Privet Drive, and refused to vanish from Harry's life. From that first wild-eyed godfather on the doorstep, through a childhood spent in a house that remembers the Black family and is slowly rewritten by love, all the way to a final battle fought by a boy who never once doubted he was wanted. We watch this Harry, grow up not in a cupboard, but in a home where he learns the difference between pure blood doctrine and chosen family around a cluttered kitchen table. We followed him to Hogwarts already knowing his parents' names, already knowing that Azkaban exists and that injustice is real, already knowing that the boy who lived is also the boy whose godfather would burn the world to protect him. This changes everything. The stone becomes a mission they plan together. The chamber, a threat he doesn't have to face alone. The Horcrux, hunt a grim road trip with a battle-scarred guardian at his side. Through it all, the emotional thread stays the same. This isn't a story about power-ups or perfect choices. It's a story about what growing up does to destiny when love shows up early and refuses to leave. It means the final battle isn't a lone walk into the forest, but the culmination of a lifetime of Sirius saying, "You don't have to do this by yourself," until Harry finally believes him. If you want more long-form what-if journeys like this, slow, tangled, emotionally grounded reimaginings of the wizarding world and beyond, this is the place. Subscribe if you haven't yet, so you don't miss the next timeline where one decision tilts the whole war, or the next character who becomes someone entirely new because one adult chose differently. And now, we'd love to hear from you. What was your favorite scene in this AU? Was it that first knock on Privet Drive? The moment Sirius wins custody in a cramped ministry chamber? Or the two of them walking into Hogwarts as a united front? Which character do you most want to see reimagined under these conditions? Remus as the steady uncle who actually stays? Petunia forced to reckon with the godfather on her doorstep? Or even Snape facing a Harry raised by the man he hates most? If you could add one twist to this Sirius raises Harry timeline, what would you change and why? Share this video with the friends you argue canon with, the ones who love transformative AUs and long conversations about what story means. Use it as a starting point, not a replacement, a way to ask how far the world can bend while still feeling true. Until next time, keep your wands ready, your doors unlocked for strays, and your stories open to one more knock.